Welcome to the first culture war on Tenet Media on YouTube. Thanks so much, everybody, for hanging out. We're going to have a fun one today. We're hanging out with Haz Aldin and Trevor Loudon. I'm pronouncing that correctly?
Yep,
Trevor Loudon?
that's correct.
And we're going to be talking about, I guess, MAGA communism and classical liberalism. So this should be very fun. Haz, do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Haz Aldin. I consider myself a comedian, a geopolitical analyst, and a political philosopher. And I technically coined the term MAGA communism, although it started as a kind of meme within my community. I run a show called The Infrared Show, which you can find on YouTube. And, I'm here to present and I think give a proper introduction to what MAGA communism is all about.
All right. Well, it should be really interesting. MAGA communism. And I think you also have a thread that we'll get into about how Marxism is not woke.
Right, yes. I also plan on releasing a book soon, which is going to be kind of a complete overview of my philosophical foundation for my views,
Right
including that thread that you mentioned.
And you work with Jackson Hinkle?
Yes. I work very closely with Jackson offline, coordinating and also discussing these ideas and so on. So yeah, I would consider Jackson's views as the same as mine. Pretty
Right
much.
on. Cool. Should be fun. Trevor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, look, my name's Trevor Loudon. I'm a New Zealander, but I live in the United States. My specialty is really exposing and exploring communism. I've written several books. I focus a lot on the Marxist influence inside the Democratic Party, inside the government, inside the social movements. And I have a blog, trevorloudon.com, and a website, keywiki.org, which has got 160,000 files of leftists, communists, socialists, radicals, from all sorts of areas. And so I consider myself... I would have started out as a pretty much a classic liberal, but I have a very strong social conservative bent and a very strong national security focus.
Well, right on. Let's just we'll get started then. What is MAGA communism?
So MAGA communism began as a meme, and the origins are actually interesting. So around a few months earlier last year, so around August 2022, there was this big meme going around. I don't know if you heard about it, the Dark Brandon meme.
Yeah.
Remember that? And it's this kind of... We took it as a kind of like, this is an example of some neo-fascism, because we regarded the support for the neo-Nazis in Ukraine by the Democrats, the increasing crackdown on classical liberties as an example of not the only conduit, but a significant avenue for the growth of fascism in the United States. So the Dark Brandon meme, we saw it as an acknowledgement of that. So we created this counter meme. It wasn't like that intentional, but it was spontaneous, called, well, if you're going to have your Dark Brandon, we're going to have our MAGA communism as like a counter, right?
Is it seriously meant to convey communist ideals?
Yes, I think one of the reasons I don't focus too much on and it's confused a lot of people, the meme aspect of it, is because for me, I don't actually see a clear distinction between meme and something serious. I think that actually comedy and ironies and things like this convey and express truths more profoundly and correctly than something kind of stoically formulated in a dry kind of purely formally consistent way.
So let's just start here then. I guess when I hear MAGA communism, it sounds like you're saying you're voting for Donald Trump and you want a communist system of governance or social order.
No. MAGA communism has little to do with the person of Donald Trump besides him as a kind of mascot. We see Trump as a meme, basically. But the truth of MAGA communism is that we believe that 2016, for the first time in decades in the history of the United States, introduced real political distinction and the Schmittian sense of enmity. Because for decades, the Democrats and Republicans, that was not really a political distinction.
Agreed.
It was a distinction on the basis of a mutual recognition of the fulfillment of the same interest. And miraculously, somehow, this kind of clown, Donald Trump, I mean, let's remember this guy's from The Apprentice. I mean, it was very funny he got elected, let's be honest. He kind of drove these two camps insane. You see the same George W. Bush Republicans and the good old Democrats, they suddenly are united in the face of this threat. And typically the leftist characterization of the MAGA movement has been this is the ground of a neo-fascism. To me, I don't see MAGA as inherently fascist. I don't see it as inherently communist. I don't see it as inherent. It's just American politics, but articulated in a grassroots and non-institutionalized form. So, of course, anti-communist ideas prevail among MAGA. Of course, many other GOP and Democrat conceptions prevail among MAGA. But the key thing is that the foundation of these ideas is no longer based in the hegemonic institutions. It's authentically based in what these people actually believe. And therefore, it is a fertile ground for the propagation of ideas, which for a long time could not be propagated because of an institutional barrier.
So then what is it, America First communism?
Well, I'll put it this way. Marxism-Leninism, and this is what the origin of communism with a capital C in modern times is, right? We can go into the history, but basically everyone was a social democrat or called himself a socialist before the October Revolution of 1917, which reintroduced the term communism and repopularized it. And it was Stalin who canonized this into an ideology called Marxism-Leninism. And if you read Stalin's Foundations of Leninism, he says the key contribution that Lenin introduces for Marxism is the national question. So you see with socialism in one country, which is kind of Stalin's interpretation of the construction of socialism, Marxism-Leninism is already, in the American context, MAGA. It's already America First when applied to the American context. The reason there's been a confusion about this among leftists who call themselves communists is because they are influenced by the Trotskyist strain or the kind of CIA-funded compatible left, as they say, type of Marxism. But Marxism-Leninism foundationally is patriotic and national in form.
Well, let me throw it to you, Trevor. What do you? I mean, you were talking about communist influences of the Democratic Party and things like this. So, how would you respond? What's your view of communism?
Well, my view of communism, as Has says, you know, what I see MAGA communism is basically an Americanized form of Duginism. So this is a movement. See, there are two strands in modern American communism. There's what I would call a feminine strand, which is wokeism, which is, let's just accept everybody, let's just break down the barriers, major emphasis on anti-racism, transgenderism, all these isms. These all come out of Marxism, but it is the feminine side, and Has is right, there's a big Trotskyist influence there. Whereas what we're talking about here is more the masculine side of communism. This is Stalinism, Stakhanovite. I can never say the word Stakhanovite communism. This is a masculine, nationalist form of communism, which overlaps to some degree with fascism. Dugin was basically trying to unite almost the right wing of communism with the left wing of fascism. So what I'm seeing here in this MAGA communist movement is something that draws on Stalinism, uses the national question, and national question means that the old original Marxism was, you use the class struggle, the workers will rise up and take the control of the means of production from the bosses. The nationalities question, or the national question, is where you find minority populations or racial minorities or religious minorities, and you foster a sense of revolution amongst them. And that will be patriotic. They will play on, they use like in Ireland, they would use the patriotism of the Catholics against the Protestants. And, the Stalinists for a long time tried to create a black republic in the south of America by using this sort of a nationalist sense amongst the black population. So they're doing that with Native Americans now, with La Raza, this kind of thing. So what I see here, MAGA communism to me is an amalgamation of traditional fascism and communism using nationalism and a strong masculine emphasis, which appeals to the young guys who are just sick of the feminine pansy wokeism.
Yeah.
But both wokeism and MAGA communism come out of the same root.
All right, there's a lot of isms here and a lot of proper names and nouns. So let's start from the beginning. Haas, do you think that the public, the workers, should own the means of production? How do we begin?
Yes, I believe in sovereign ownership of the means of production.
So you mean like the state controls it, or what?
Of course, yes.
And your views, good sir?
I think the state should be minimally involved in the economy. The only real role of the state is in the judicial system and in national defense. So no, I absolutely oppose state ownership of assets. I don't like public ownership of assets. And that would be, I think, the defining difference between me and Haas, is that he sees the role of a strong state, a strong, vigorous state that directs production. I see exact opposite. The individual, the local, should direct production and own property.
Well, I actually believe sovereign ownership of the means of production precludes two things. One, what Lenin calls, and what Marx actually originated in his 18th Brumaire, is the smashing of the state machinery, that we cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state that exists, the insane bureaucracy that corresponds. And Marx actually talked about this to the capitalist society, but the state must be remade anew, simplified, made efficient, and to an extent, yes, minimalized, because it is the aspiration of communism to basically relegate the state to its bare necessities and for the eventual dissolution of the state, obviously, and into free association.
You're saying
when
absolute idealistic communism is people all just agreeing and working together or something?
No. There's still a centralized oversight of production, but it's what Friedrich Engels calls the administration of things and not people. So you have a centralized oversight of production, but the necessity of the forceful suppression of opposition, for example, disappears. And this is projected to be at the time when the material foundation of the state as an organ of class dictatorship withers away. Now, many people doubt that this is possible, and it's somewhat of a theoretical and philosophical question, but as relevant now, I don't want the current American government to own more. I don't want the current American state to control more. What I want is a completely remade state, a state fashioned from the ground up based on, yes, local forms of power, amalgamated and centralized to authentically represent the interests of the overwhelming majority. And this is where it may surprise you, it is a goal for the state to be minimally involved in production. Sovereign ownership of the means of production just means that foreigners, that private interests cannot gobble up the resources and land of the country. But as to who manages that land and who sees to its production, this is something, ideally speaking, should be as local as possible. This is China's kind of household responsibility system, which did delegate production down to the lowest level, the family level. And I think this is true to the aspiration of communism.
All right. We'll start with a very simple question. What does means of production mean?
The means of production basically refer to the fundamental basis and conditions for the production of things.
Only material things? What about intellectual property?
No, there's no such thing in the Marxist view. Basically, I view personally intellectual property as a scam, basically. Even in terms of classical liberal values, I think it's a transgression of... I think it's completely illegitimate.
Intellectual property?
Yes.
So what about, so what's the incentive then for invention if you can't own what you've invented? You have to like hide the secrets and make sure no one ever finds out how you did it?
I believe credit can be given to people, and notoriety and fame and due glory can be given to inventors and creative geniuses. But one of the things I dislike about intellectual property is that one's product should be good on the merits. If someone can simply replicate your product, I don't think this steals anything from you. I think they're just...
I mean, let's try this. If it was legal within the current system for people to take all of my content that I produce and immediately re-upload it whatever they wanted, I would cease to exist overnight. So, for instance, my morning show, the Tim Pool Daily Show, I produce 4 segments per day, and they're not allowed to be taken, right? It's my opinion, my commentary. There's fair use arguments, so there's a limit to people are allowed to take it, play the video and talk over it because it's not a replication of the work, it's something different. But if there was no intellectual property controls, as soon as I uploaded the video, 70 other channels would upload the exact same thing. It would decentralize my ability to generate ad revenue, attention, and make money, and I'd stop doing it instantly.
So for content creators, it is a necessity right now. I'm not going to deny that. But I think with two things, the advances of technology and a transformation of the financial system. See, one of the reasons content creators rely on intellectual property is they need it to generate revenue. The means of generating revenue for someone who's uploading your content to their channel and your channel seem to be the same, right? But with, for example, innovations in the sphere of software technologies like blockchains, there are ways to verify and authenticate the original source of...
But what does that mean? I mean, if I can't control how the revenue generation for a piece of content, it doesn't matter if people know it's mine.
I think it can matter because if we, for example, entering into the fourth industrial revolution in a kind of post-commodity money economy, your acquisition of wealth could very well be tied to your signature, your blockchain signature, rather than simply some kind of exchange of like views for dollars.
So you're saying that that signature is is intellectual property. No matter where the content is posted, the revenue comes to me.
Well, I wouldn't say it's intellectual property because there's nothing preventing someone, for just like an NFT, for example, there's nothing preventing someone for like downloading the JPEG and doing whatever they want with it. What they can't do is fake the signature.
But what does that do for the person who made it?
It gives you a signature. It confirms that it's yours. This is the original thing.
How does it buy my milk? Right, milk, bread, and eggs. Like, are you saying, look, would the state just give me free food? Is everyone going to get free food, or?
No. By the way, I don't. To be clear, the version of the communist system of the 20th century, with rations and with standardization of basically what everyone gets based on what they do, that was a requirement for the goals of those circumstances, which was the immediate modernization of the productive forces from a backward agrarian and feudal economy. In a dynamic information-based economy, an increasingly decentralized consumer economy, for example, it's much more similar to China, where there isn't this kind of uniform compensation for what you do. It is measured based on some... So, for example, it can be profit, for example, is a form of the measurability of how successful you are. But I think
so. Let's go back to that point then, specifically on the intellectual property question. Right. If I put up a video that takes hours of research and I record a live, 30 minutes, and then as soon as it uploads, 100 other people re-upload it to their accounts, you're like, how do I profit from that? Are you saying that because the content is verifiably mine, any revenue generated from anyone else just comes to me?
You have to ask the question, when we're entering into this new type of information economy, it's currently outdated how it works. We get revenue in dollars for something, a form of capital that I think is more worth more than money, right? basically, I think clout is more valuable than money today. I don't know if you would
Yeah,
agree.
but it is. But how do you eat, right? You need money to buy food.
Yeah, that would be a question of I mean, we want to innovate everything. We're basically talking about a fourth industrial revolution. So we must also think about how to innovate the entire financial system, how money works, how currency works, and so on and so on. And I do think that would be connected with things like blockchain technologies.
But I'm just not. I'm not sure I understand. Right? If you don't believe in intellectual property,
Yeah.
a signature that I guess I'm trying to wonder, how would I make money? I don't think you've answered it. How do I make money in a situation where I think
how it would work is that if you have an enterprise, and by the way, enterprise is not a dirty word. There were Soviet enterprises. You will be compensated with resources necessary for what you need to do based on your performance.
So resources.
So
Is that money?
if you're successful at reaching people based on your content, then you will be compensated with some kind of you could call it money. You could call it, Marx theorized about labor vouchers. You can talk about tokens.
Labor vouchers is effectively currency with restricted currency.
Yeah, it can be called whatever. But yes, effectively, you can be compensated with some kind of means of acquiring more based on what you put in.
Money.
Sure, you can call it that. I think the one.
So then, if
yeah.
the signature only applies to me personally, that means I own that signature and have ownership of the content that I produce, because if it's reposted anywhere, but it all reverts to my signature and compensates me, that means I own the intellectual property.
Right, but this is a form of effective ownership. It's not a form of ownership enforced by a third party. It's a form of ownership that is self-evident in the product. So, for example, I own my personality. I don't need to have the government say, this is Hawes's personality, no one else can have it. As an original person, it's a form of effective.
What if someone takes the content, inverts the colors, generating a separate key, and then directs the key to themselves to generate revenue? Would there be an adjudicating force?
I think unfortunately, I do believe in a harshness of reality where if this is what people prefer and they like it better, you have to step up your game. You know.
So the issue is, in a reality where someone can spoof a key or alter the content in such a way that it's not transformative, doesn't fall under fair use, like they're literally just trying to repurpose the existing content. Let's just put it this way. They find a way to bypass the blockchain signature by, like, I don't know, dropping the pitch by a half step or altering the colors, and then they start getting the money from it. I cease to exist overnight. This content doesn't happen.
Again, perhaps under the current circumstances, that's the case for all content creators, but I think we should be a little more appreciative of the possibility that in the future, things will not work the same way as they do now.
Trevor, do you want to jump in on this communism?
Well, I think this is the main mistake of Marxism. They assume that human consciousness is shaped by the material environment. So if we can change the material environment, if we can have new technology, human behavior is going to change. Human incentives are going to change. I think that's a complete fallacy. You know, intellectual property is what drove the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't the cotton gin. It wasn't the steam engine. It was patents. It was the banking system. It was the derivatives, the stock market, that all these things that were driven by intellectual property rights, that were not just, you know, a book or a machine or a forest or whatever. They were actually intellectual property. Now, so in the future, human nature is not going to change. Human nature's been human nature forever. Humans respond to personal incentive. That's how we're programmed to be. And the problem is, whenever the communists will say, well, we're going to change the material form of existence, and that's going to change the nature of man, and we can have a cooperative environment, we can have incentives that aren't directly monetary, all this kind of thing. It's all untrue. Nothing will change about human nature. Nothing at all.
I agree.
So you design a system of liberty where human nature can blossom, where people can build their own farm, they can build their own business, they can build their own podcast. It's theirs. They control it. See, if you have some, as Haz was talking about, you'll be compensated if your stuff is good. Well, who decides that? It's going to be a collective that decides that. Back in the Soviet Union under Stalin, they had the Writers Guild, the Writers Collective. And there were certain writers who were favored by the Soviet state that lived quite comfortably. They got royalties from their poetry, they got royalties from their plays, but only if you conformed to the state. If you were a dissident in any way, you either risked jail or you lost your position, you lost your privileged position. So this is the beauty of freedom. You can come out with an idea or a product, and the state cannot interfere with you. But if you have any form of collectivism where people can decide what you do, how you think, whether your product or service is valuable, whether your ideas are false or true, if other people can decide that other than your customers, it is only going to be those who curry favor with the establishment or the existing social order that are going to prosper. Freedom gives people the freedom to be stupid, to be creative, to have any idea they want, and the market determines whether that idea is good or not. Any form of collectivism destroys that. And that is the engine of human progress and the engine of human creativity.
So I want to say three things. The first thing is that I agree that to the furthest extent, which is why I oppose intellectual property. Intellectual property requires the state to enforce property rather than an effective form of property. And I think this is why even many free market libertarians believe in open source, because intellectual property requires, in a feudal-like way, some kind of political authority to enforce the economic reality. Whereas the ideal for a free market capitalist is that the economy works on its merits. It works by itself. It doesn't require third-party intervention to uphold. Even in the enforcement of property rights like land, some libertarians go as far as to say, I should be able to have a nuclear silo in my backyard to protect my sovereign ownership of land. So you don't need this decentralized state to enforce your property according to that ideal. It works just by itself. The second thing I would like to say is I disagree with the view that some kind of centralized legislative or political body would have to determine exactly how much someone is compensated for. And I think basically it's simple. AI today has the ability to kind of calculate based on algorithms you can put in.
So a human does that, though.
Right, but yes, of course, the system is designed by a human, but the system can also work by itself, that you are rewarded for how much output you produce, basically. So this can be measured, and this can be kind of mathematicized. So secondly...
I got to stop you there.
Yeah.
It cannot be, right? So we've seen what happens when humans try to create an artificial intelligence or algorithm to determine output, and what you end up with was ElsaGate on YouTube. YouTube said, we want long form, we want keywords, we want to put in all these parameters. Basically what they did was they looked at what was working on Netflix and YouTube, and they said, these are the key components of successful content,
Right.
fed that to the algorithm, and then what happened was people started putting out videos of Hitler with a woman's body doing Tai Chi with the Incredible Hulk, while someone sang nursery rhymes. So that doesn't work.
AI definitely has the potential to run amok and produce undesirable outcomes. But let's ask ourselves, what was the purpose of that kind of algorithm? It was just to maximize viewership and engagement, specifically targeting children. Is that a goal as a society we want to have? That children's attention is fixated on their screens and on YouTube? Probably not. So obviously there is a human element, but when it comes to the economy, we all hate BlackRock. I'm not a fan of BlackRock, but I do appreciate innovations in the productive forces. Already, this is how it works. Our retirement funds, basically, that's what BlackRock mostly manages, by the way, can calculate already. This is how the current so-called capitalist economy works. The profitability of a given enterprise determines how much is invested in it. So already this kind of feedback loop, the foundation and material basis of communism, is already here. Now, we don't like ESG scores and how they're being used, but that's a question of who controls the means of production, not necessarily a question of the technology itself. And thirdly, this is the kind of last point I'd like to say, I actually disagree that in the Soviet Union, because of a problem of human nature, there was a lack of incentive. I think since the beginning of time that is recorded for human history, a true artist aspires toward glory, recognition, and for their product, for their work to be realized at all costs. I believe you are a kind of fan of Ayn Rand. Would I be correct?
Well, she was I really admired her.
Yeah.
She was a foundational thing for me, yeah.
Well, even Ayn Rand actually can appreciate this irreducible human striving to produce the work for its own sake. I mean, Atlas Shrugged, wasn't it about an architect? Wasn't even about...
No, the Fountainhead was about
Fountainhead,
the
yes.
architect. Yeah.
It was about an architect who was actually focused on their art above all else, right? So I think when someone engages in the production of art and creativity just for the sake of getting rich, I don't really think that's the sign of a powerful artist. I think a powerful artist puts their work before anything. And this is why Soviet artists, this is why Steven Spielberg himself said, Soviet films and cinema is better than Hollywood. Because actually the restrictions of the market and having to focus on profit margins wasn't there. So artists were free to actually pursue a creative vision completely freely in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, but there's pros and cons to that. I mean, without any kind of mechanism for incentive, you'll end up with a bunch of weird, crazy garbage. With an profitization model, you end up with Marvel movies. These like cookie cutter, bland ABC storylines that eventually people are just like, okay, we get it. You made the same movie 15 times. So there needs to be a balance. I wonder if the real issue is simply cultural. If you look back at like the 80s into the 90s there are so many movies that they're trying to reboot and recreate because we loved them so much. And then today you look at the movies they make and it's like Transformers 12 and Marvel 16 and just cookie cutter garbage.
But if I may say so, I know I'm biased here, but at least this is my opinion and my taste. I think an exception standing out to this kind of nostalgia industry, the Disneyfication of all of media, is Chinese cinema, particularly Chinese science fiction. I've watched both movies, The Wandering Earth 1 and 2, and people accuse the Chinese cinema of being bland and just kind of blockbuster disaster movies, which it has been maybe for a few decades, but I think these movies have a soulfulness and have a kind of spirit to them, which authentically tries to capture the moment we're living in now, to envision the future. Today, what cinema and what movies really speak to an embrace of the future and the present moment? We're trying to go back to the 80s, to our childhood, to the 90s, and we don't have an ability to bravely see through some kind of way to make meaning and beauty out of the future ahead of us. So I think communism actually, to me, is a part of that aesthetic striving of having a responsibility before our collective future.
I think one of the big issues is multiculturalism, and the component of it being, you may have seen these videos on Instagram or YouTube where actually Instagram massive, no one talks. They have, there'll be like a guy will do something, maybe like a magic trick or something like this, and the woman will have this crazy expression on her face because they're trying to convey an emotion without language, because they're trying to appeal to the widest bases, the biggest base imaginable. If you make lowest common denominator content, the ideas are all stripped out. You're not going to get well thought out linguistic works. You're going to get a guy throwing a football at another guy's groin, and then a woman going like, wow, and then everybody, that's going to get more shares, because it's not that it's better. It's not that it's good artistic content. It's that if 90% of any culture hates it, but 10% of every culture likes it, that's going to be more views, more money, more incentive. And so determining value is relatively difficult today. And trying to figure out how we make good artistic works, I wonder if the challenge is simply, this is why my focus is always cultural. I don't think there's a governmental or regulatory solution to all the problems people keep complaining about. It's totally cultural problems. If everybody, I tell people this, communism works 100% very easily, so long as everyone agrees with it. The problem is humans don't agree with everything, and you'll always end up with various amounts of dissent. The problem for any kind of system that seeks to have a purity within it is that there is only one solution to undesirables. With a system like, classical liberal constitutional republicanism, or these fields of liberal values, true liberal, not like modern American liberal, is that we tolerate dissent to varying degrees, which allows people and ideas to compete, and then certain ideas improve.
Can I jump in here? Because look, Huz is right. In the Soviet era, there were some great movies made. There was great ballet. The Soviets put a lot of emphasis on culture, but within limits. If you were a poet like Pasternak, who talked about lyricism and beauty and whatever, he was tolerated. But anybody who talked about politics or any form that was opposed to Stalin, you went to the camps. Like Mandelstam went to the camps, like Akhmatova was persecuted, Tsvetajeva, etc. The reason we have lost our way in the culture here is because we've had so much Marxist influence in Hollywood, so much Marxist influence in the churches, so much Marxist influence in education, that the American values that people grew up with in the 50s and the 60s that were optimistic, America's great, freedom's great, we're going to lead the world, they have been so denigrated and so crushed that all it is left is this nihilistic, gangster type of culture, these bland, insipid movies that come out of Hollywood. Look, in the 50s and the 60s, that was a golden age of American art, of American culture. Now, I'm not saying we should go back to that. We should go back to the system that produced it. We should have freedom. You cannot make certain movies in Hollywood now. You cannot have certain comedy acts. You cannot say certain things. You look at Monty Python in the 80s and the things they used to say that you cannot say now. Because that is all cultural Marxism. And Haz is being just disingenuous here when he says that Marxism, that wokeness is not Marxist. Wokeness is 100% Marxist. It is cultural Marxism. It's drawn from the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So we've got this feminized Marxism that has wrecked our institutions, wrecked our colleges, wrecked our movie industry, and now Haz is coming up with this sort of masculine communism, which appeals to people who are sick of the feminist pansy wokeism. But it's two false alternatives here. We had a system that worked well, and Marxism has destroyed it.
I think the issue is, there are a lot of practical arguments for. I don't like using the word communism because it's a reference to a historical phase, and we can talk about maybe distributed or public ownership of the means of production or whatever that may be or whatever. But there are a lot of interesting questions, and I'll give you one anecdote that was probably formative for me when I was younger. I met a homeless guy in Chicago. I had some pizza left over, and I'm skating down the street. I had a half pizza in a box, and I saw this guy, and he's like, "What up?" And I was like, "Hey man, are you hungry?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm hungry." I was like, "You want some pizza?" He's like, "Hell yeah!" And so I gave him the pizza, and then I was like, "Can I ask you a question?" And he's like, "Sure, shoot." And I asked him why he was homeless. The story was actually simple. He worked at the post office his whole life. Eventually, they closed his post office down. He was too old to find any kind of other job or meaningful work. He searched. He couldn't. Eventually, his savings dried up. He couldn't pay his rent. They evicted him. Here he is homeless. I said, "What about friends and family?" He said, "Man, I'm old. They're all dead." He's like, my family's dead. I didn't have a brother and sister or something like that. He's like, "My friends, lost all of them." And so I thought to myself, Here's a guy who is a trained master postman. He has every skill we have asked of him. He has done everything we as a society have asked of him. And then one day we decided he was obsolete, and there was no mechanism by which to allow him to continue to function faithfully in society. And so I thought to myself, like, well, we can't have that. If there are people who have jobs that become obsolete, and then for that they now have no access to society's resources, we are going to get violence and revolution and chaos when jobs start to disappear. I'm not saying I have an answer for this. I'd say that's something that gave me pause and made me wonder, like, what do we do to solve a problem like that?
So
well, it isn't a problem.
So I think
there's it is a problem.
I have an answer to that, but Haz's.
I'd like to briefly respond to actually what both of you have said regarding liberalism and Marxism and so on, and I think I can condense this into one point. You know, one of the things I probably disagree with, and it's maybe ironic because it's the communists in America who are thought of as utopians and idealists. I actually consider myself a pragmatist and a materialist, which means I believe in getting things done. I believe in a sobering acceptance of reality as it is, not as I want it to be. And part of that means I have to appreciate, for example, I cannot accept this notion of a pure liberalism, which I think is at the root of much of this disagreement. It may have been true, as you said before, that liberalism promotes this ability to kind of be outside the system maybe and disagree with the hegemony of some kind, but it's because of the contradictions of liberalism itself that we have entered the kind of authoritarianism, which I think you misidentify as Marxism. What you call Marxism is a result of liberalism's own contradictions. And what is this contradiction? Liberalism, which promotes freedom, has no positive content of freedom. What does freedom look like, right? And once you have, for example, perceived sociological, cultural, even economic, political structures which stand in the way of this liberal freedom, these become enemies of the liberal society. The conservative family becomes an enemy of liberal society. The remnants of cultural differences between different groups becomes an enemy of liberal society. Because remember, it's a value of liberalism, radical liberalism, that all distinctions of the standing in the way between individuals dissolves, and one is just an individual. All collective identities, all collective forms of existence are regarded as an obstacle to the realization of the total freedom. So paradoxically, liberalism, whose value is libertarian and letting people do what they want, becomes its opposite, authoritarianism. And Dugin, I don't agree with the view that I am just an American Duginist.
No, I don't say just, but I'm saying there's an influence.
Right. The influence is there. I acknowledge that influence. And one of the influences, I think he renders quite succinctly, that liberalism must become itself the ultimate totalitarianism, because this abstract notion of freedom, because it's not concrete freedom, befitting of a concrete existence of a people, it's just abstract freedom of the individual, must actually become totalitarian and enforce this freedom at the expense of our human nature, I think. So the wokeness in Hollywood and the kind of cheapening of... Also, you mentioned in the 50s and 60s, this was the golden age of liberalism. I disagree.
No, of culture.
But I disagree, because in the 50s and 60s, remember, this is fresh off the boat of the New Deal. And actually the response to the failure of liberalism in 1929. And paradoxically, with neoliberalism, the economic liberalization of the economy, that's when we got all of this kind of cultural authoritarianism and restrictions.
That and everyone knows the 80s were way better. Your decades are wrong.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Well, I'll define what I am. You talk about liberalism. I'm an American constitutionalist. The government should be bound down by the chains of the Constitution. That has economic benefits, and that establishes a system of property ownership, property rights protection, right to self-defense, Second Amendment, etc. But that doesn't mean you don't have social institutions. You have churches, you have friendly societies, you have all sorts of institutions where both an individual and a collective being. But This is the whole point. You know, freedom does not lead to tyranny. Tyranny leads to tyranny. You talk about the New Deal. You know, that was when basically the communists ran Hollywood. The communists ran the Roosevelt administration. They set up the Works Progress Administration, which flooded the country with thousands of left-wing writers and socialists, etc., which had a very bad effect on the culture. Look, it is not about the economics isn't the key factor here. The key factor is human liberty, and human liberty cannot be guaranteed in any form of collective system, whether it's fascism, socialism, communism. Human liberty can only be guaranteed in a constitutional system where the government is limited to its bare functions, which is national defense, suppression of crime, a justice system, etc. That allows the churches to flourish. That allows the social institutions, the friendly societies, the community groups. That allows the flowering of civil society.
Let me ask you: do you think that people should have a right to be obscene in their language in entertainment?
Well, if in a private setting, of course.
But you mean like a comedian should be able to go on stage and start saying all the nastiest things he wants?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, in the 50s and 60s, that was illegal.
Yeah, in certain places it was. You know, I'm not saying that was that was perfect at that time. Lenny Bruce pushed back against that kind of thing.
Right.
You know, in a
George
private,
Carlin famously arrested.
Exactly. In a private setting, in a private club, you should be able to say what you want to say. That's
so the reason I bring this up is going back to the 50s and 60s and 70s and even to the 80s, it has been a gradual transformation in our culture to allow more and more of what culturally we would describe as obscene, to the point now where we have child drag shows, children ripping their clothes off on stage for cash. So I hear a lot of this, you know, both from you, Haz, you know, and Trevor, and to me everything just comes back to, is a group of people aligned culturally? Because then there's no question. If you had 100 people and they were all communists, pure, genuine communists working with each other, you've got no issues. In fact, there's actually a commune in the United States that caps out at 100 people. If someone leaves, they'll allow someone to come in. If people don't tolerate the communist structure, they ask them to leave and replace them with someone else. And it functions well because they've culturally homogenized their community. In the United States, we can talk about all the great works that were happening, but it was enforced cultural homogenization in that it's not absolutely, right? There's dialects, there's different styles. You go to one area, there's different music there, but there were certain barriers of, if you do this, not only will you be arrested, some people might beat the living crap out of you.
Yep.
So you had, I mean, look, people talk about this. If a child drag show happened in the 50s, I don't know if those people who were putting that show on would make it out alive.
Well, look, a child drag show shouldn't happen now because we have laws to protect children. But if the adults want to do a drag show, they can do it whatever they like. Yes, there was cultural repression. There were laws that shouldn't have been there. But there's also social pressures. And a cohesive society will have social pressures. And as Haz says, an artist or someone who really is on fire for an idea or an artwork will defy those social pressures, and that drives social progress. But when you get legislation, which you did in the Soviet Union, which you do now in China, you know, in China you can be a Christian, but the Bible is actually changed to worship the state, not Jesus. You can do all sorts of things in China as long as it's within the parameters. I'm saying for free individual adults, there should be no legal parameters on their behavior as long as it does not hurt anyone else or endanger the national security of the country. But in a communist system, there is none of that. None of that.
What do you mean by hurt? Define hurt in a legal sense.
Well, you cannot steal. You cannot rape. You cannot defame, tell lies about somebody to damage their reputation. You cannot sell the country's security secrets to a foreign power. These are all, well-established things that most societies understand.
Well, let's go back to the hot button issue of today, which is child drag shows. Is that hurting someone?
It's hurting children. You have no right to inflict a minor to that kind of thing.
What is that kind of thing? Like, I'm trying to figure out how we legally define what. I obviously have my opinions on it, but I'm curious. Like, what about a child, putting on this makeup, acting in adult manners, and pulling their clothes off? Would you define as the line legally? Like that the law should intervene and say you cannot engage in this behavior?
Well, if you put on a show that it's exposing male genitalia, that is,
but not they're not all doing that, right?
No.
The issue for me, I'll break it down, is you've got 10-year-olds on stage at adult bars where it's 21 to enter, but they have special laws that allow children to perform and then leave, and they have little boys ripping their clothes off, revealing still more clothes, but it is the act of stripping down to like shorts or t-shirts as men throw money at them. This is a sexualized performance. I personally believe, I'm not a staunch libertarian or anarchist or anything like that. I believe that many of our laws are rooted in strong moral systems, which is why there are certain limits to when parents have rights and when the state has rights. So does the state have a right to force a medical treatment on a child in defiance of the parents? That's a tough question, right? Depends on the medical treatment. If we said a kid was dying because their parents were trying to enforce veganism on them and they were protein deficient and malnourished, we would definitely want some authority to come in and be like, you got to give the kid meat. You got to give him food. But what if the parents are trying to, the parents are refusing, say like a gender transition, and then the state decides for the betterment of the child, we are going to intervene. We, at least we here at Timcast, I'd say absolutely not. The state should not enforce and mandate that on parents. So there really is a cultural and more individually communal-based morality around when we want the state to intervene.
And this is the beauty of the federal system, because you have different cultures in different areas. And certain areas, they have ordinances against strip clubs. Some places it's fine. That is best left to the local level, that kind of thing. But the principle that underage children should be exposed to that kind of stuff, I have no problem with the state stopping that at all.
So I actually think you're onto something when you're talking about culture and this issue of culture, because let's ask ourselves a simple question. In China and in even Iran, a non-communist state, there are no necessary laws against these things. Why? Because it is already organically within their culture. And it's an unwritten rule that this is impossible. So these unwritten bonds of civilization, which don't have to be enacted into law, is actually the more fundamental premise of communism. What does communism mean in China for a Chinese person? In America, it means the totalitarianism for the average person when they hear that word. But in China or in Russia, communism doesn't mean the totalitarianism of the state. Communism means the already recognized communal existence of the Chinese nation or the Russian nation, given, elevated to the supreme interest. This is why it's inherently patriotic in China or even in Russia. Like the communists in Russia are, far more patriotic even than Putin, right? And there's a reason for that. Because communism everywhere outside of the West means giving representation and political supremacy to the existing civilizational values and communal bonds inherent in a people. This is why Marxism-Leninism is national in form. Now, in the American case, we have a problem in America because we don't know how to define ourselves as a nation. We don't have these unwritten bonds of civilization, or if we did have them in the past, they've substantially eroded. But to bring it back to the question of the impossible ideal of liberalism, why is that? And I think I would respond to it by saying, because in America we have seen the total hegemony of cultural liberalism, the view that any collective existence is false, is not legitimate, and that the real legitimacy is only the whim of the individual. And this is an extension of the liberal ideology to the sphere of culture. So the question of communism in America is not just a question of the economy or policy. It's also a question of acquiring and building a nation. How do we learn how to live with each other and reproduce ourselves as a civilization? This is a fundamental communist question, as much as the question of who owns the land, who owns the banks, and who owns the resources. There's also a question of how do we exist collectively or in an organic way without it having to be enforced. And I think this is the premier American question of the 21st century. America must find a way to exist as a nation, or else the United States will be united no longer.
I'm not convinced that it can find a way. And to go back to what you were talking about when you mentioned federalism and, certain rules in certain states, I think that is actually a recipe for disaster. It may be good in a certain sense for a certain amount of time, but ultimately it will lead to chaos. Abortion is a big issue in the United States. It's one of the key wedge issues. And my position as of today is that it is a federal question, whether or not an unborn human being does have constitutional rights. You don't have to agree with me. My point is simply this. If we have two states, we have Oklahoma and Colorado, they border each other. In Oklahoma, abortion is completely illegal. In Colorado, it is completely unrestricted up to the point of birth. A lot of people I talk to, more libertarian and classically liberal, will say this is a good thing. That means if you want those rules, you can go to Colorado and get those rules. And I say, what happens when, under one system of governance of the United States and one constitution, a man and a woman get pregnant? Obviously, the woman is the one pregnant carrying the baby. And let's say at 7 months, the woman decides, I can't be with this man. I don't want to have this baby. Now, the baby can survive outside the womb, but she decides to jump the border to Colorado, taking the child with her. The man then says, no, wait, don't kill it. There's no reason to kill it. I'll take the child. It's my child. And Colorado says, we don't care. We're going to kill it. You have these dramatically different worldviews, where in one state, they're saying she is kidnapping a child to murder it, and Colorado saying it's just a medical procedure. I don't see how in the long term, and this is, I'm not trying to ignite an abortion debate. I'm just pointing out one extreme example where the views are becoming so disparate that it could lead to absolute violence. And we saw this with the first Civil War. I say the first, scary, right? In the United States, where you had states arguing who is or is not a person and guaranteed constitutional rights. And so the Civil War in the United States was not completely just about the civil rights of Black Americans. It was a much broader and complicated issue. However, it was obviously slavery, which led to this main issue. Bleeding Kansas, pre-Civil War, 7 years, was a fight over whether or not Kansas would be a slave state or a free state. And the disparate ideologies of the United States were murdering each other in that state. And then the Civil War started, which brought in all the other states. And this was mainly around whether or not Abraham Lincoln was going to abolish slavery or suspend the expansion of slavery. Then when Abraham Lincoln, of course, rallies troops and conscription and makes people go quell the rebellion, it causes many other states to break apart. So you get my general point here.
I think what I would say is that one of the things Marxism, I think, is useful for is identifying that there may be a deeper cause. And this is not economic reductionism, but it's an analysis of his social differences. So we know in the Civil War, underlying this difference of opinion were different classes, the slavocrat classes of the South, for whom slavery was the primary mode of accumulation, versus the kind of northern industrialists who believed that, no, we shouldn't have a stagnant system of accumulation. We should have industrial innovation and so on, which was directly opposed to slavery, which was stagnating the productive forces. So underlying the clash of the ideology was a class difference, and I think it's the same today. I think today the difference you're seeing in America is a clash between hegemonic institutions, which act as social engineers, elevated above all of society on the basis of modern science and on the basis of expert knowledge, versus the communal, or whether we agree with them or not, the authentic values a people possess, or at least think they possess. Because I'm not going to give conservatism such an easy, scot-free free pass. That's exactly it. Because I understand also how certain capitalists also influence this kind of rural areas and completely drive opinion and all of the brainwashing that goes on. But nonetheless, they have a more authentic interaction with these kind of beliefs. It's more close to their heart than, say, a kind of liberal who just believes this because an expert told them to believe it, and they don't relate to it authentically necessarily. So what I will say is that, look, America, amidst all of our multiculturalism, amidst all of these cultural differences, there is something that we can identify, at least in a preliminary fashion, that is common to us as American civilization, and it's pragmatism. We believe the ultimate truth as Americans is what works, what is sustainable, what can fend for itself, like Jack London's The Call of the Wild, a beautiful piece of American literature expressing our culture. And I think it's true also for culture. Look, we can have these debates about what should be moral, what should be legal, what should we put on the books, all we want. But at the end of the day, what matters is what's going to work. What's going to be compatible with a genuine collective human existence. And when I say that, I mean the ability for human beings literally to reproduce an existence, not only biologically, that's also very important. Like, people need to be able to feel like, you know, they want to have kids and raise families and have family values, but also something that's not going to drive people to want to kill themselves and have a moral crisis where they get into drugs and fentanyl. And this is the spiritual element that is actually, if you want to put it in a vulgar way, necessary for human beings to work, just to exist. Like, we need to feel like we live in a society commensurate with morality, with beauty, with goodness, just to be able to function. So it's very American that we place an emphasis on just functionality, and it works. But I think this may be a key to, for me at least speaking, I'm the only communist here, but for me, this is key to American communism. Understanding the pragmatism as a kind of basis.
You know, so really what it comes down to in all of these arguments is a cohesive culture where people agree with each other.
No, well, no. No, look. We have a system that works when it's used, and that's the American Constitution, the division of powers. And you're right that federalism creates problems, and you have cases in Texas. A mother will take her transitioning boy to California because she can't transition him, and you can't transition him in Texas. But if you have a centralized unitary state, whichever faction gets into power can enforce their dictates on the whole country.
Well, of course, unless everyone had the same moral beliefs.
And we don't all have the same moral compass. You know, there is a unifying culture in America that's getting increasingly shattered right now because you have a big polarization going on. And I'd say that is driven almost exclusively by the left. You know, you talked before about you know, the communists in America. Well, look, parties like the Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, they have had a major impact in infiltrating the universities, infiltrating the Democratic Party, driving their policies, whether it's socialized healthcare, whether it's transgenderism, whether it's wokeism, gutting the military, you know, making America no longer energy independent. You know, you got a Marxist right now who's Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, and she is cutting every energy lease she possibly can in this country. You've got a Secretary of Energy, another Marxist, Jennifer Granholm, who wants to make all U.S. military vehicles electric by 2030. You've got another Marxist, Julie Su, who's Secretary of Labor, who is helping these Chinese-driven strike wave that we have seen in the United Auto Workers Union, in the almost put UPS out on strike. These are driven by the Chinese, just like Black Lives Matter was driven by China. So we have this massive Marxist infiltration of our institutions, which is fracturing the country, destroying that cohesiveness for a reason. They want a revolution here.
Right, but that seems more like our nation's being attacked with disruptive, chaotic ideas instead of someone's trying to build something, right?
Well,
like
they look, and this is a key point that Haas is talking about. You got this, you know, they talk about the unifying communism in China, or say and I still think Russia is, as you say, Haas, has still got communist forms there. When the communists are in control, they want to unify the country. They want family values. They want to unify. They are patriotic, but they spread the disruptive side of communism here. Just like China will execute drug dealers, but they kill Americans with fentanyl every day because their goal is to destroy America and keep their country together. Russia will clamp down on gays and transgenders, but their communist friends spread it here because the goal is to destroy us, to take us over while preserving themselves. This is the whole crux of the argument. Communism is patriotic when it's in control. When it's not in control, it's completely unpatriotic because its goal is to destroy the existing social order so they can then establish their order.
So I completely disagree just because of, I think, part of is practical experience on my part, what you say about DSA and CPUSA, and also my understanding of history. You say that it's the communists who have infiltrated the system, but all evidence and experience on my part shows me the opposite is true. It's the system that has infiltrated the communists. So during the 1940s, for example, there was a 50,000 member strong CPUSA. Maximally, according to some historians, 300 of which were Soviet agents of some kind. Now keep in mind, after the invasion of Hungary in 1956, where there was widespread disillusion with the Soviets ceased to have ideologically motivated agents. They would just bribe people, basically, with money, right? But at this point, fast forwarded decades later, of an 8,500 strong CPUSA, 1,500 of them are FBI informants. So the CPUSA itself has been infiltrated. The institutions, the academic institutions, because remember, I don't mean to be too much of a Marxist, but I also think it's common sense. What makes more sense? Just an ideology being the octopus that is driving all of this, or money? Who funds these institutions? Who funded the destructive cultural left, as you describe it? It was the CIA through Rockefeller Ford Foundation money, the Institute for Social Research, the Frankfurt School. That was funded by the CIA. Specifically, and this is where I disagree with you, it's not that China and Russia are disrupting our culture with this stuff. We are doing it to them. We are spreading cultural color revolutions to disrupt traditional societies all across the world. We're not only doing it against the communists in China and Russia, because who funds the LGBT movement in Russia? It's not communists, it's us. We do it, right? We also do it in Europe to our supposed allies, Hungary, and all of our NGOs and interest groups. We're the ones spreading wokeism globally. We're doing it through the oligarchical capitalist class. And let me tell you something, as someone with some experience in this regard, I am a devoted communist who does want a communist power. It's like, as Marx says, the communists disdain to conceal their aims, right? So as do I. You cannot keep an operation going without a steady flow of income, money, and revenue. Or else the institution that the agent is planting themselves in will corrupt them. If you have a communist sitting as a post as a professor in a university for 40 years, the institutional culture of the university, which is bourgeois, according to Marxism, will shape their outlook. This is why Maoism talks about the need for a mass line. Even when you create a party apparatus with a bureaucracy and a fundamental organization, you're paying people a salary, Mao innovated the necessity that you need to actually break out of that bubble, that institutional bubble, go down to the people, rural people, the country, and hear the opposite perspective, to humble yourself, right? Because institutions corrupt people. So I completely disagree that communists have infiltrated the institutions. To me, it seems more clear that the institutions, funded, financed, and created by the oligarchical capitalist class, have corrupted the communists.
Well, this is what I'd say to that. The foundations, the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, were infiltrated by the communists starting back in the 30s, even the 1920s. All of those institutions are promoting communist left-wing causes. The Biden administration has is chock full of communists. That is why they are spreading this wokeism around the world. That is why they're doing this. But this. So the FBI, which used to attack communists, is now basically working for them. This attack on MAGA that they're involved in, this is because they are driven by leftists.
Well,
Comey talked about his communist background. Brennan talked about voting, the head of the CIA, talked about voting for Gus Hall. The communist movement, the socialist movement, has massively infiltrated almost every major American institution. And this is the cause of the wokeism. This is the cause of the chaotic American foreign policy, because we are being used to destroy ourselves and our allies, and that is being directed from China and still to some degree from Russia.
You're saying that wokeness is not communism.
No.
And that's why you have MAGA communism.
Well, it's not. It's just Marx. There's no wokeness in China or Russia. There's no wokeness in communist countries.
Well,
so
China's, they're doing ads where they've got young men who are fit. Russia is doing these military commercials where they're ripped men with shaved heads jumping out of airplanes.
So to me, it's like MAGA communism is not just a response to wokeness. MAGA communism, the meme, if you want to know the meaning of it, is basically this. The fertile soil of a communist movement in the U.S. will have as its foundation the same people who are MAGA right now. It will be that because to me, MAGA is trying to give America a collective existence. It's trying to give identity to an American nation. I don't mean, it's just white people. I mean, it is outside of the institutional hegemony, at least to an extent.
But let's pause. So do you oppose what we would describe as like the woke left?
Yes.
The Palestinian LGBT flag? What do you think of that?
Look, here's the thing, right? I don't hate LGBT people. I think there has been a great deal of confusion, a breakdown of the family, a rise of enmity. People are channeling their feelings in destructive ways. So I want what's best for these LGBT people. I want them to be able to find peace with what they're struggling with. But whether it's the right wing or the current woke leftists showing solidarity with Palestine, I choose to believe there is an authentic reason for why they're doing it. Yes, of course, leftists are interpreting it in terms of the post-colonial studies and whatever whitey bad stuff, and right-wingers are interpreting it in their own problematic ways.
But my question, sorry, just to get what the modern left that we see in this country.
I don't like LGBT flag. I don't like any LGBT flag.
I'm just saying, like, the woke left is not what you would view as communist.
Absolutely not.
Their ideals are mostly based on weird identity-based things. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I started my career trying to reinvigorate the CPUSA using modern media technology. And I have run up against the obstacle of the Ukraine censors. I've run up against the obstacle of censorship on all these other issues. I have never run into a more profound obstacle in my career than what the CPUSA has done to me. And I wasn't problematic. I wasn't bigoted. I wasn't any of these things they now accuse me of, just because I wanted to reinvigorate that party and return a foundation. This is what communism is about. Your foundation of a communist movement. This is true. Go back to the beginning of Marx, Lenin. This is Communist Organizing 101. Is in the working class. That's your foundation. That's where all of your ideas have to authentically interface with. The notion of a communism based in universities and elites and professionals and intellectuals, it's against Marxism. How can it be Marxist? Marxism is about the class struggle.
Do you have a commune? Like, do you have like a community or anything that you've built or are building?
I don't. This is more the utopian socialism, which actually has a very long history in the United States, and it was critiqued by Frederick Engels and Marx. There was various in the 1800s. They called them utopian socialists, and they wanted new harmony and so on. They wanted to build these kind of a shell of what they would consider a functioning society. Now, personally, I think America is an experimental culture by nature. And actually, I'm not against experimental forms of association at all. I just think that we should find ways to reward and be inspired by the ones that work. So room for experimentation and then see what works. But to me, communism is not about a certain lifestyle. Communism is about a way of relating to the existential predicament of your nation, to your people, and most importantly, to the working class.
Describe your, like, how is communism achieved? What would this country look like?
If it's achieved. Well, I can't speak too far ahead into the future because I'm conditioned by what exists now. Again, I'm a pragmatist and materialist. But if I had to guess, I think a communist America would embark on a very heavy emphasis on the building of large infrastructure, industry, and most importantly, rapid acceleration of the productive forces, ushering in a fourth industrial revolution much faster than we currently are doing now.
So it would have to be a cultural thing. It would have to be everybody agrees. We're all gonna like the space project, right? Like all America was super unified and we loved the space race.
Yes, if you understand Antonio Gramsci, who's one of the most important theorists of Marxism, before political power can be achieved, some kind of cultural foundation of communism, of communist hegemony, must be built. But most people confuse Gramsci for the phrase "the long march through the institutions." That doesn't come from Gramsci. It comes from
Rudi Dusche.
Rudi Dusche, right, who was a dissident in East Germany, who opposed the actually existing socialist system and fled to West Germany and kind of became a new leftist, third worldist, and so on. So, no, Gramsci believed that you build a foundation of cultural hegemony by having a foundation in the working class, building institutions that are funded by the working class collectively, that are upheld by them, that are maintained and reproduced by the working class.
How does the working class determine what to fund?
Organization. You create organizations. First of all, you create perhaps businesses. Today, there's a ton of possibilities. I mean, even having a YouTube show that you can garner millions and millions of viewers of working class people, that's a form of communist capital you can build. You can have businesses, cooperatives.
That's private venture. If people choose to give me money, then I use that money for what I want to do with it.
Sure, but it's conducive to the aims of a communist movement, which is to build a form of cultural hegemony. Obviously, that's going to be within the system we live in now.
See, that's the issue I'm trying to understand, because I don't think that's communism, right? That doesn't seem to make sense. I think culturalism, perhaps, like the mission we have here is, we produce content. We have a show. Yeah. We try to. We have our varying opinions on the show.
Yeah.
And then people choose to give us money. We use that money towards ideological ends.
Well, the premises of a communist economic system, those are material. You cannot voluntarily create communism. The prediction of Marx and Engels and of Marxism in general is that according to historical and material laws, the capitalist mode of production, within the seeds of capitalist production itself lies a transition into socialism and communism. And I think they've been vindicated, actually, because another view I have is that technically, I like to use terms that people understand. So when I say we live in capitalism, it's just I'm referring to an institution. But technically speaking, I don't think we actually live in a capitalist mode of production anymore. I think
I agree.
We've gotten rid of commodity money. According to Marxism, that's central to a capitalist production. Money must be a commodity, right? Gold, for example. Money today is fiat money. Okay, so when currency itself, when exchange value itself is political, we can't talk about living in a capitalist system anymore. Also, the information economy, I think, has done a lot to accelerate a transition into a post-capitalist economy. I don't think enterprises are purely profit-based anymore. I think that there's this...
ESG.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely that. So, building a communist movement is going to be this is what Marx said. The premises of the communist movement are now in existence. So yes, communists can open small businesses to create a hegemony and fund a movement. Is that a capitalist relation of production? Maybe, but is it one also within a wider transition, regardless of what we do? Yes. Also, communism doesn't come from the sky. It comes from the premises now in existence. So, Lenin said this. It's kind of an idea to get the view of what communists believe, but it's kind of gruesome a little bit. but it's, understand it metaphorically. You hang the capitalist with the rope he sells you. But I don't believe in the violence. You understand, it's like you're destroying the system through the system itself.
Well, to say you don't believe in the violence, Haz, you've got the invasion going in the Ukraine right now. You've got threats to invade Taiwan. You've got Russia's puppet, Iran creating mayhem in Israel. These are all violent things. But we'll get back to an area. You talked about the mass line before. People need to understand what the mass line is. That's a Maoist term. And the theory is you go to the people, they give you the ideas, and you come up with a mass line, and everybody must do it. Well, we saw the mass line during COVID. We see the mass line through Black Lives Matter, which is a Maoist construct. We saw the mass line in transgenderism. You cannot challenge transgenderism. You could not challenge the masks, lockdown, vaccines mantra. You could not challenge that. That was enforced through the World Health Organization, which is controlled completely by the CCP. Let me finish. Sorry. I gave you a good go. And so this is enforced here by pro-Chinese politicians, pro-Chinese unions in our state. We saw communism through COVID. We saw communism through Black Lives Matter. We're seeing communism now with the transgender movement. We saw communism with the fact that you cannot challenge election results. This is mass line politics in America now, enforced through the CCP, through the big tech that depends on the CCP, through the institutions controlled by the CCP in this country. That is tyranny.
I got to say,
pure tyranny. There can be no other result of communism than tyranny.
Right, you mentioned the famous line of "hang the capitalist with the rope they sell you," and that I think describes the issue of the CCP you're describing perfectly. American institutions, big tech, for instance, they say, "We want to make a bunch of money. How do we do it?" In America, you can make any movie you want. Certainly don't offend the activists and, the woke left or whatever, because they'll boycott and it'll be a whole big nightmare. So for the most part, however, if we make a movie with certain things in it, people won't really care. However, if you want to release that movie in China, you got to draw the dotted lines around the South China Sea. Because China is a massive market with monetary opportunity for American companies, the American companies are going to adhere to the path of least resistance, which means in the United States, nobody cares, for the most part, if you draw 7 dotted lines around the South China Sea. In China, you have to. So what do the movies do? They just do it, which means American culture is being influenced. Google is banning people who say things like against the World Health Organization, not necessarily because, probably partly because they are ideologically aligned, but it's because they're like, look, if we want our products in China where we can double our revenue, we have to adhere to the CCP. It's cheaper if we just do it across the board. This means that in the United States, we will be subject to the pressures of the CCP. It is American capitalist endeavors trying to make money, bending their knee to the CCP and other dictators because it's cheaper.
And you look at why is sports so woke? Because Nike controls sport. Who is Nike in bed with? Look,
they want to sell.
Look, some libertarians say we should have free trade across the world. I completely disagree. We should be completely disengaging with China, with Vietnam, with Russia and Iran and Cuba.
Well,
absolutely disengaging because they will not survive without our support. We are keeping them in business so they can destroy us.
Well, I think this is part of the contradiction of liberalism I mentioned. But before I get into that, I'd like to say 2 things. One is that the mass line. I completely disagree that the COVID response in the United States, or Black Lives Matter for that matter, was an example of mass line. How do I know this? Preceding Black Lives Matter was an injection of what I believe to be $500 million by George Soros. So it was an institutional endeavor from the top down. If it was a mass line, they would be going down to people outside of these institutions and having that inform their outlook, these activists. But they did the opposite for both COVID and Black Lives Matter. What they did was impose views synthetically created in the bubble confines of universities and tried to impose this on the people. I live in Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer was my governor. Okay. Oof. If Gretchen Whitmer did the Maoist mass line in Michigan, she would go to northern Michigan, she would go to places people are living, and actually appraise their thoughts, their feelings, their mood, and their consciousness with regard to her lockdown measures. And if she did that, she would have been able to very easily understand.
Well, what do you mean?
Well, she would
did go around praising people, and she did arrest people who opposed her.
No. But that's not the mass line. The mass line means let me finish. You formulate your policy and you formulate your response to a given event based on your understanding of where the masses stand. And the masses in Michigan stood opposed to what Gretchen Whitmer was doing. She was out of touch, so it's the opposite of a mass line.
But most people were just like, it's not so much whether she's aligned with them or not. It's what are they willing to accept.
But this is the key point.
But whether they're willing to accept it or not, those policies were formulated by, for example, Dr. Fauci. By that I mean by out-of-touch expert institutions. The Chinese Cultural Revolution and Maoism bombarded these institutions. They bombarded the experts. They bombarded the technical specialists and said, no, the feeling and will of the masses is more true, right? So it's the opposite. It's hyper populism. It's not the technocracy of COVID or Black Lives Matter. Now, I also want to say with regard to
he wanted to respond to that.
Well, look, this is the big deception of communism. They say, well, we will consult with the people, they will formulate our ideas, and then we'll do the mass line. That's not how it works. They come up with an idea, they do these fake consultations. They say, well, the people agree with us, therefore we have a mandate to do it. That's how they do it. This is the thing. Communists talk about democracy. What is democracy to a communist? It is the will of the people. Who are the representatives of the people? The communists are the representatives of the people. So therefore, democracy is the will of the Communist Party. So the mass line is exactly what we saw in Black Lives Matter, a Maoist Chinese communist operation with deep connections to the Chinese consulate in San Francisco, run by the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and Liberation Road. It was completely enforced because real mass line in the real world is the imposition of the mass line from above through Tedros and the World Health Organization, a Chinese puppet, through Susan Mickey, a member of the British Communist Party who now runs the World Health Organization's social conformity unit. What we saw through the transgender movement, through the COVID, was Chinese mass line enforced on this country through subservient politicians and pro-Chinese communist
this is
labor
contradicted
unions.
by a cursory examination of the facts. Okay, in China today, you go to a rural peasant who is more outside of the reach of the central government, and they're hanging a picture of Mao on their wall. And part of the reason of Xi Jinping's rise and his kind of neo-Maoism was a grassroots populism. So I completely reject the notion, and I think expert historians will probably reject the notion that the Cultural Revolution mass line was synthetically created in the communist.
But just to clarify, you're saying that a rural Chinese peasant will hang pictures of Mao in reverence?
Yes, absolutely.
Is it possible that it's because they killed anyone who wouldn't?
No, because if it's the same in Russia today, long after Stalinism, even in the history of the Soviet Union and today, there's no Stalinist power ruling Russia today, right? There's no repression of people against Stalin. It's to see what people in Moscow are saying, these liberals in Moscow. You go to the remote regions of Russia, those are the Stalinists. It's the ordinary people who revere Stalin. So the same thing is actually true in China. So the notion of the communist mass line just being the imposition of the Communist Party institution, that was the very thing Mao conceived. That was the very problem Mao was working against with the mass line. And his populism was authentic. There's a book I would recommend. It's called The Unknown Cultural Revolution by Dongping Han. And in it, you'll find eyewitness accounts. And this guy is some kind of dissident in China today, but he records eyewitness accounts, records, and historical data that shows actually the Cultural Revolution was a populist uprising of Chinese peasants. It was the imposition of a people's dictatorship over the kind of bureaucracy of the party.
Do you know how many people died in the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution?
There's no way of knowing for certain. There's the Black Book of Communism estimate. The problem with the Black Book of Communism is that 2 of the 3 authors who participated in compiling it disavowed it later and said that the editor was obsessed with reaching a total of 100 million just because.
Yeah, some say it could be
ideological
5
reasons.
to 50 million.
It was a lot.
It's wide
First,
estimates.
regarding the famines in both the Soviet Union and in China, yes, many people died. Yes.
Do you believe the story of the sparrows and the pig iron in China? Do you think those are historically accurate?
They may be contributing factors, but overall, the reasons for famine in both the Soviet Union and China was 2 things. A combination, the most important one, I'll rank them in order, was the rapid transition to the modernization of agriculture from a pre-modern agrarian society. That caused a disruption in the food supply, and because it happened in a very rapid, condensed time period, right?
So that was it. Central planning changed how they were.
Not just central planning, but see, rapid modernizations of agriculture, if you look historically, have led to the worst calamities everywhere, including in non-communist states. Accompanying English industrialization, we had the Irish potato famine, which killed more as a proportion of the Irish population than did Mao's Great Leap Forward.
You're saying that the potato famine was the result of modernization?
Yes.
It was a result of a deliberate policy of the British to suppress the Irish. But look, this is the central lie of communism. This is the central lie of communism. Okay, we can debate whether 5 million, 50 million, 40 million died, as though that doesn't mean anything.
Of course it does.
This would never happen. Did this ever happen in America? America industrialized more rapidly than
on the back of British capital. We had access to...
Well, it doesn't matter where the capital came from.
They didn't have access to any capital. They had to
America
do it from scratch.
industrialized because America had a free system.
That's not
where
true.
People could employ... Yeah, well, see, this is where we disagree. America was great because America was free. People could invest. They could bring capital in.
No.
They could build factories. They could build... It was never central planning. Every time central planning has been... You just said it. Rapid transition, forced rapid transition, dislocation of the supply chains, massive famine.
So
it wasn't all accidental either.
It wasn't
all. Some of it, the kulaks, between 6 and 10 million kulaks deliberately starved in Ukraine.
I completely disagree. But before we get to the allegation about Ukraine, actually, you're wrong about American industrialization. It's a big myth that the American system of economics is free trade. That was actually the British system. Adam Smith and the classical political economists.
I'm not saying it was free trade.
Those were the British.
It wasn't.
In America, we had something called the American system, which originates with Alexander Hamilton, and which Abraham Lincoln upheld in the apex and foundation of American industrialization, which was deliberate centralized state policy for public credit to deliberately inspire technological innovation and industrialization from the top down.
To a degree, yes, it was.
So also regarding the view that it's deliberate, look, it was condensed within a short period, but why was that? The Soviet Union, before it was even formed after their revolution, literally half the world invaded the former Russian Empire to destroy the Bolsheviks. So Stalin in 1931, he said, we have 10 years to catch up militarily and in terms of our industrial economy, just 10 years, or we get buried by the world. Well, what happened 10 years later? The German invasion happens. So it was a matter of life or death. They had to do this if they wanted to retain their sovereignty. And to say that I think there's no meaningfulness to the millions who perished, no, of course, it's one of the most worst calamities in the history of those countries. But you have to understand their necessity.
But there is a context to it.
But it's freedom or slavery. Do you submit to foreigners to rule over you, or do you have a sovereign economy?
This is not a binary choice. It's not a binary choice.
It was for them.
There's a reason why I asked this question, right?
True.
So in this period in China, are you more or less likely to survive if you are pro-Mao?
Probably yes, but that's also
more likely. I mean,
but a lot of that is part of what you mentioned earlier, which is the kind of unwritten cultural kind of thing.
But that's
if you go on stage, you get attacked or something.
So in the Great Leap Forward, in the Cultural Revolution,
yeah,
if you are directly challenging these plans and what Mao was doing, would they negatively impact? Would that negatively impact your life?
I couldn't say, because there was so much chaos during that period that even people who were fervently pro-Mao,
Right,
this is part of the horrible tragedy.
So you're saying that those photos we have of the struggle sessions and everything, those could have
that happened later. That happened a decade later during the Cultural Revolution.
That's why I said the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution.
Oh, okay. The Cultural Revolution, yes, there was a lot of violence.
So my point is, in these periods, were you more or less likely to survive if you were for communist these revolutionary changes?
If you were pro-Mao, but here's the thing. Even during the Cultural Revolution ultimately was ended in failure. Mao himself admitted this. It ended in the factionalism of Red Guards, because it wasn't enough just to support Mao. You had to prove it authentically, right? So this led to an atmosphere where these student Red Guards would start killing each other and attacking each other because of
purity tests.
Yeah. But here's the thing: what happened
Just
to them?
Like we have in American society now.
Well,
Maoism,
just real quick,
Maoism.
when in the period of like a week, the word Womixen, WOMXN, was considered the politically correct way to refer to females. And then that sparked a backlash where they said it was trans exclusionary. So the attempt at wokeness created multifactional internal wokeness conflict.
I think
it's meant to do, which is meant to divide.
I agree there is a parallel, but I would want to repeat a quotation by Karl Marx. He said, "History always repeats itself, first as the tragedy and second as farce." And I think this is an example of how the capitalist West is actually behind the history of communism now. We are catching up to the communists in China, because China doesn't have this issue anymore, because Mao sent the students down to the countryside. They learned from the excesses and the mistake. And I also disagree, despite all of its failures and despite the tragedy of the Cultural Revolution, there was still something there that was authentic, an authentic attempt to rediscover the authentic basis of communism based on belief, based on devotion to the cause. In America, that's not what you have. There's no actual real cause or real unifying belief people are devoted to. When someone calls you, for example, transphobic, they're not saying you are standing in the way of the glorious people's triumph or something. They're saying, well, you're just personally a bad person. You're a piece of shit for being a transphobe or whatever. So it's not even really politicized. They don't even directly acknowledge that there's a level of responsibility. There's a stake in it. It's just kind of seamlessly understood or conceived to be like, oh, I'm a normal person, right? The Red Guards, for all their faults, right, at least were devoted to one cause, one ideology, and most importantly, even if they failed in doing it, authentically giving expression to the will of their people. Woke people don't care about doing that.
Right. So here's the bad news, I guess, for you. I think that I'm not gonna pretend that I know what's true or not in terms of conspiracy or stuff, but it is fascinating to me that you've got powerful interests in the intelligence agencies that are very, very pro woke. Mm-hmm. And they have aligned wokeness with communism, because the end result of much of the policies or ideas of wokeness is depopulation. I am not saying that there is a depopulation agenda. I'm saying if you are woke, you are more likely to be for abortion. You are more likely to be for practices that will result in the sterilization of children. Ultimately, what we're seeing now is that conservatives are more likely to have children, and leftists are substantially less likely to have children. The further you go left, the lower the chances of having kids will be. Now, the right is concerned that indoctrination in schools will help leftists overcome this shortfall generationally. That mathematically does not align. What we are seeing now in the polling, Gen Z males of Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and boomers, Gen Z males are the least likely generation to identify as feminist.
Yeah.
So clearly, indoctrination in schools does not work. However, of the people who do align with modern versions of American Marxism or communism, which includes wokeness, they're not going to reproduce. The long-term end here is going to be communism loses.
What I would say, though, is that I think there is a depopulation agenda. It does come from the oligarchical ruling class, the Club of Rome, the Rockefellers. These is the capitalist class. And I think you're getting it backwards. These people who call themselves Marxism in the West, tracing their origins to the CIA-funded compatible left, they're just trying to give some inauthentic ideological legitimation to an already existing agenda. And the agenda doesn't originate in Marxist ideology. The ideology is just being used to legitimate the already existing agenda. And the agenda is obvious. Monopoly capital wants to stifle the growth of human beings, civilization, and other entrepreneurs in order to maintain its hold on rents, in order to maintain its power, right? So I think that's easy to explain actually from a Marxist lens. And so what I disagree with when we say that wokeism is similar to Marxism, where there's some kind of...
It is Marxism. It's not similar.
I completely...
Well, it's cultural Marxism.
Completely...
There's economic and there's cultural.
Well, I completely disagree, because while in academia there was an exploration of Marxist ideas in the 50s through the 70s, and then ran out of favor and was replaced by the kind of postmodern Foucault and so on, who were actually more influenced by people like Nietzsche and these, not really Marx, right? Marx is considered, by the way, Marx, like orthodox in a sense. He's outdated, he's patriarchal, he's Eurocentric, he's cis hetero patriarchal, whatever. He himself is just critiqued in academia. But the connection to Marxism only is this very vague, very ambiguous kind of commitment to freedom and
well, it's are you familiar with the origin of critical race theory?
Yes, but this was as a critical race theory. Not many people know this. Began as a rejection of Marxism, which elevated the class struggle as the principal.
That's incorrect. Kimberly Crenshaw wrote specifically. She specifically wrote in the book Critical Race Theory that Marx was right, and he didn't. But what he missed from the American context was that racial politics played a major role in oppressor versus oppression. Whereas Marx's view was economic. She said you can't deny the race-based component in the United States. Therefore, building off of Marx's critical theory, we must add the component of race to it.
Yeah, but making oppressor and oppressed the fundamental basis is not Marxist. That comes from the legacy of radical liberalism. Marxism is about understanding objective historical laws and social contradictions, which is not reducible to some simplistic oppressor-oppressed. That's liberalism, because liberalism was primarily focused on getting rid of explicit political structures. Marxism is more focused on understanding how the development of the mode of production and the relations of production actually condition the political superstructure.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. People think of Marxism in purely economic terms, and that was the basis of it. But Marxism has changed a lot. The Marxist movement, and I talk about the communist movement. The communist movement is transgenderism. The communist movement is Black Lives Matter, because it's a destructive movement in the West that wants to break down the social structures to replace it with their social structures. You look at critical race theory was absolutely invented by Communist Party members. The concept of white privilege was invented by Ted Allen and Noel Ignatieff, two members of the Communist Party USA, who then went into the Provisional Organizing Committee, a Maoist group. You look at Ted the founder of the modern gay movement was a Communist Party member. All the radical gay movements in this country now are controlled by Marxists.
But it sounds like what you're saying is that communists are using these things to destroy the system.
Absolutely.
This is not representative of what they actually want in the end.
To replace the system, transform the system.
From
like
the ashes of the old, we shall build a new.
You have to destroy the existing social structures.
Right.
What I'm trying
to clarify here is what Haas is describing is, here's a system we want to make. What you're describing is, here's how communists are destroying the current system.
Exactly, because they may say their goal is this class, this society. It will never get to that. Once power is centralized in a few hands, it only ever stays in a few hands.
I agree.
Communism is not about redistributing wealth or a social change. It's about concentrating all wealth and all power in a very, very few
Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
So during Occupy Wall Street, in the early days, it was eclectic. There were conservatives, libertarians, leftists, liberals, socialists, communists. Some of the principal organizers who eventually took over the movement, pushed everyone else out, centralized all the power within themselves, told me that our goal is to flip the pyramid.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, now the average person might take that to mean the bourgeois ultra elites get put on the bottom and the working class is on top.
Or the homeless.
But that's not true.
Yeah.
What actually happens if you flip a pyramid over? The bricks crumble into a pile of bricks with someone from the bottom now on top. And they said, exactly. They said, we hope that when we flip the system, it puts us in the central elite authority positions where we can run the system properly.
But I don't see what's specifically Marxist. This is just liberalism. If you look at the history,
how's that
this
liberalism?
classic Marxism.
Let me continue. The classical liberalism was precisely about this kind of rebellion against the existing authority and structure. Vaguely speaking, there's nothing specifically Marxist about that. Obviously, Marxism is revolutionary, but it's not based in this kind of simplistic, we want to put the people on the bottom, on the top. I'll give you an example of this. There's also something I want to speak to with regarding the communist infiltration. But, Marxism doesn't say the poorest members of society are the revolutionary class. The poorest members of society are the lumpen. If you understand, the term lumpen proletariat, the criminals, the vagabonds, homeless, drug dealers, addicts, and so on and so on. That's the lowest. The working class is actually not necessarily the poorest part of society.
No, aren't they the bourgeois?
Who?
It was the middle class, weren't they?
No. The bourgeois is not defined by its wealth. It's not necessarily defined by its social status. It's defined by its relationship to the mode of production. So it's very important distinction to understand. Marxism is not flipping the pyramid. Marxism is about understanding a class struggle already existing before Marxism. Now, I want to speak to what you mentioned about communist infiltration, so-called. Look, to the extent that there's the communists or the transgender movement and BLM, I can personally attest that that is only to the extent that they have compromised with the ruling class. I'll give you an example. Gorbachev was not a hardline communist. He was a liberal who was trying to reform the communist system. All of these people,
I would dispute that.
All of these people you mention are not communists. They're ex-communists. They're former communists. They're communists who were traitors who compromised with liberalism. And that is actually with precedent. Lenin is someone who arose in distinction because he recognized the treachery of the Social Democrats who sold out to the system. And the same thing happened with Gorbachev. The same thing happened with the CPUSA, Angela Davis, the Committees for Correspondence, which wanted to overthrow the hardline communists and have a Gorbachev-style liberal democratic reform. So these people you mentioned are just the traitors who sold out to the ruling class.
These are key communists. Look, you got Michael Kinchner out in Phoenix Democratic Socialists of America now, who boasts how he got inside the Boy Scouts and changed the policy. He did this inside the Boy Scouts to change their policy from no homosexuals allowed to admitting homosexuals.
Okay. I just want to clarify too. I was correct about bourgeoisie.
That destroyed the Boy Scouts.
I was correct about my statement on bourgeoisie. I just
mean?
fact checked myself. It refers to the business owners in the middle class, somewhere between the lowest and highest income.
It's a technical
reference
term.
to urban charters and the merchant class.
Right, but in Marxism, bourgeoisie refers to a specific relation of production. Sociologically, it may vaguely refer to all these other things, middle class. But from the Marxist standpoint, the bourgeoisie is those who the capitalists who own the means of production through private property.
Right.
Okay.
But my point is, it does not mean the ultra-wealthy oligarchic elites. It means the guy who owns the mom-and-pop pizza shop.
No.
Yes, it does.
Well, here's the thing.
Literally originated in France, relating to urban charters for people who owned businesses.
The bourgeoisie started out small, yes, but what it has concretely evolved into is what Lenin would describe a imperialist bourgeoisie or monopoly bourgeoisie. And Lenin actually doesn't identify, he makes a distinction. He says there is a petty bourgeoisie, which can be an ally of the proletarian movement and actually should be an ally of them because they have an interest in overthrowing the ruling bourgeoisie.
I'm going to tell you the issue I take.
Yeah.
The issue I take is I use a general academic term for a certain class. You deny the definition. And then when I say, here's at least the generally, you said, okay, well, Marx says something different about it. So look, are we talking about the same thing or...
So I want to just be clear about what I think. I don't think people who own ma and pa shops are part of the same class as the oligarchical elites.
This is the issue I take with modern leftism and even what's happening now is racism means something different. Bourgeoisie means something different. It means whatever we need it to mean for our political ends.
It means what the book says if you read
No,
the
it
books.
doesn't mean what the book says. It means a word represents an idea that we can use to communicate.
If you want to pull up
issues.
the great Soviet encyclopedia on the petty bourgeoisie,
right? So
even Wikipedia
if I say a word and then
you
you say my book says this word means something different, this is the obfuscation of words for the purpose of winning a political debate.
Hold on, let's just clarify what we mean. I don't mean...
That's why I asked, does the bourgeoisie represent? And you said, no, it doesn't. But what you're doing is you're taking a different altered definition of a word to change what our argument actually
But the bourgeoisie does not mean this for Marxists. It has never just meant that for Marxists, and it also doesn't just mean this for the purposes of what I'm trying to say.
And this is what the modern left does in the United States with racism and class. But they say our word means something different. You misunderstood us.
Hold on. You're trying to say that because I reject the view that the bourgeoisie concretely that we're talking about is the ma and pa shop.
I'm saying
this means I'm obfuscating words.
When I said
call it whatever you want.
You could have said that actually is the traditional academic view of bourgeoisie. In Marxism, however, instead you said, no, you're wrong.
Okay, so you're upset that words can mean different things in different contexts.
No, I'm upset that the left typically changes the definition of words to suit their political ends.
I think anyone who just uses words in different contexts, which everyone, regardless of their political alignment, does, I just think this is just an unfair kind of characterization of what I'm trying to say.
Go ahead.
Look, the typical thing is racism here. To most Americans, racism means unwarranted prejudice against somebody because of their color or ethnic background. Racism to a Marxist means the power structure. It's about the power structure. So it means that a certain segment of society, usually racially based, oppresses another segment of society.
Okay.
So you can get a black football player on $40 million a year who is oppressed and is suffering racism by some white guy on food stamps. Racism means something totally different to a Marxist than it does to most of us. Democracy means something totally different. And as to your point about infiltration, I'm going to do some promotion here because I write books about Marxists in government. I say in these books, Security Risk Senators, I profile 30 currently serving U.S. senators who are involved with Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, Iran, China, Cuba, and North Korea. Patty Murray out of Washington State, and deeply involved with the Communist Party USA for decades.
And how powerful is this person, you're saying?
Well, she's one of the third-ranked Democrat in the Senate.
And you're saying that she is currently in the Communist Party USA?
No, I didn't. I said she has worked with the Communist Party USA for decades.
On what?
On social policy in Washington State. She has she has funded their organizations. She's steered state funding to their organizations.
And she's funded them to create a working class popular movement, or funded them to
create
do what?
To get money to take over institutions.
Like which institutions do the communists control?
In Washington State.
Right, which ones?
They control most of the labor unions in Washington State.
Which labor union in Washington State is controlled by the Communist Party?
By the Communist Movement, SEIU.
So you're changing the definition of words. Instead of the Communist Party, it's the Communist Movement. What does communist refer to concretely?
Let me finish. I said she is deeply involved with the Communist Party.
How?
But also because
define deeply.
They worked in her campaigns. She funneled money to
How is that
causes.
Deeply? That's what do you mean? What do you mean by work? Did someone pass out leaflets in the Communist Party? The Communist Party is irrelevant.
Your counter to my criticism of you changing a definition.
I'm just applying your criticism.
No, you're
to
literally
you.
not. You're arguing semantics of the word work and deeply. And when I asked you to define bourgeois, and you gave me a Marxist alternate definition of it.
Tim, to be clear, okay,
this is a very specific word.
I'm a good
and work.
Okay. I'm a good Maoist. I will do the struggle session and the self-criticism myself. I repent for refusing to draw equivalence between the meaning of the bourgeoisie as it applies to France in the 1600s and the
general
bourgeoisie
definition
today.
used by regular people to convey an idea, and you arguing the definition was wrong for the sake of your ideology.
So by the bourgeois, okay, let's talk about ordinary people. Technically speaking, bougie. The word bougie is used in like hip hop culture to refer to like the ultra rich. It's not used to refer to ma and pa shop. So actually, you're changing the definition to mean something scholastic
and say bougie.
Yeah,
bourgeoisie academically has a meaning that is where people are trying to convey an idea to make an argument.
No, academically speaking, that's the technicality. If you want to be an academic, you have to consult the literature, and the literature states that the bourgeoisie, typically speaking, is referring to the hegemonic or big bourgeoisie. The petty bourgeoisie is a different classification. It's not synonymous. Now, you can say I'm changing the definition of words. Please, I implore you, read elementary Marxist literature, even the Communist Manifesto. It's only 7,000 words. It's literally in there. It doesn't equate the capitalist class with the petty bourgeoisie.
The point I'm making is, you read a book from Marx, and determined his interpretation of the word is now the universal interpretation.
So where did the academic community get it from?
It's a French word.
Okay,
That
what
goes
did
back to the 17th century.
So you're saying the academic community in the contemporary context refers to the
general-
bourgeoisie as the 1700s French burger class?
Like
the
when
mercantile,
we're conveying a general idea and we seek to look up a definition to better understand it, and we read a general view of it, it has a meaning.
Okay.
So what we often see in the United States from the left is, as Trevor pointed out, with the word like racism, they redefine the parameters based on their specific academic view outside the confines.
But he's redefining the word communist to mean anyone who has any tangential association
That's not what he said.
whatsoever.
No,
he
no,
said
having-
she's worked with the Communist Party. He said how? She's funded the communist movement. That is a one-to-one correlation.
Okay. What is a communist movement without the party? What is that refer
it's
to?
Democratic Socialist America. It's Liberation Road.
The
It's
Democratic,
Freedom Road Socialist Organization.
do you know who founded the Democratic Socialists of
Michael
America?
Harrington.
So why didn't he call it a communist party?
Because he wanted to infiltrate the Democratic
So
Party.
Michael Harrington
And
was being insincere when he talked about his denunciation of Marxism, Leninism, and communism. Is that what you're
Absolutely.
saying? What's your
100%.
evidence for that? What's your
well,
evidence for
because
the
he then
insincerity?
he hooked up with the New American Movement, which came out of the Communist Party USA,
which
and
came out of
SDS.
it. So these are
Yeah,
people who splintered out of it
but
and
they were
rejected
still Marxist-Leninists. Right now,
Based
got
on what
Democratic
evidence?
Socialist. Because they explicitly state it. I've got huge documents.
it. They
Democratic
stated it
Socialist
in the
America
past, or they state it today.
right now.
So the DSA is officially a Marxist-Leninist party.
It is a Marxist
Well, are you saying they're
organization
not?
which
They're
has
absolutely not. The DSA
the
rejects Marxism Leninism
Absolutely.
as authoritarian.
Absolutely untrue.
The whole point of
100%
democratic
untrue.
socialism,
is to
was
fool people into accepting communism.
was to compromise with the liberal hegemony because they were
it was
saying
to take over the liberal. They explicitly stated they got there to infiltrate the Democratic Party. Democratic Socialists of America gave us Obamacare. This is the central secret of came through
What's the
Quentin.
evidence? What's the
I can
evidence?
talk. I've written whole books on this.
okay,
I can look. It came through Quentin Young, who was a Communist Party member, who then became a Democratic Socialist
Became a
American
traitor.
member, and was Obama's personal physician.
I think-
and claims. Let me finish.
Yeah.
Let me finish. Virtually, open borders came through the communist movement. That is a Communist Party and Democratic Socialist America construct which has been used to destroy America. The push
Right.
for the Iran nuclear deal came from the communist movement. The central central secret of communism is this. The small Communist Party takes over labor unions. The labor unions influence and control the Democratic
So you're saying
Party.
Joe Sims of the CPUSA and Joe Sims and Rosanna are they're the puppet masters of the Democratic Party in America. Is that?
Yeah, I am saying that. The people around them.
Joe Sims is senile. He doesn't even.
Look, the
I know-
Communist Party USA. I know Joe Sims too.
Yeah.
The Communist Party USA is led by Joe Sims, but the movement is much broader than that. You've got the
You're saying he's the
Liberation Road.
puppet master.
Well, he is part of that apparatus.
Who's the puppet master?
Well, I would say Judith LeBlanc would be right up there.
Who is that?
Judith LeBlanc. She's the one who put Deb Haaland in as Secretary of the Interior.
And
She
what is
mounted
their
the-
relation to the Communist Party?
Judith LeBlanc is a member of the Central Committee of the Communist
And
Party.
she herself put someone in a position of power?
Absolutely, she
How?
did. She mounted a campaign called Deb for Interior.
Yeah.
She ran it. They had Facebook pages and buses. She got a whole bunch of celebrity endorsements like Alyssa Milano, Mark Ruffalo, Sarah Silverman.
Right.
They got Deb Haaland nominated as Secretary of the Interior.
So you're
that
claiming-
is 100% documentable.
You're saying that she originated that entire campaign.
100%.
So,
she led it.
Can you
She
name
led
a
it.
single Communist Party member who is in office right now?
I can. That is not the point.
No, that is the point.
That
because
is
one of
not-
the things we've been pushing for is them to field candidates instead of kissing
hey,
Democrat
no, you're
ass.
trying
and they can't
you're
do
trying
that.
to dissimulate here.
No,
Look,
they don't
it
even.
is-
They don't have
this
any
is-
independence. They're
Well, no, no,
subservient
no,
to the
hold on,
Democrats.
Let me finish my point.
They're
Real quick,
subservient to the
real quick.
finish
Democrats.
my point.
What he's saying is quite literally, if you don't declare you're a member of something, you have nothing to do with it at all.
That's right. There's
Well, we need
there's a
proof.
communist movement. There's a few people in the Communist Party that direct a movement. The communist movement is why we have open borders. It's why we have Obamacare. It is why Iran is about to get the nuclear
Right.
weapon. The communist movement controls the labor unions of this country, and the labor unions control the Democratic Party.
As long
That
as we
is
change
why-
the definition of
that-
communist movement.
Yeah, the communist
agree.
movement is anybody who has an allegiance to the communist movement. Some are party members, some are not. Some are Democrats. Like Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, deeply in bed with the Communist Party. While he was criticizing Trump for Russia, he had a Communist Party member as one of his key staff members. You
And
know,
what was their key role as the staff member?
he was running one of his offices.
So I think what you're doing is cherry picking cases where communists are acting as subservient to the Democrats. Because here's the thing I can
cases.
prove. Here's,
Look, Obamacare.
here's what I have practical
Obamacare
experience
was
with.
completely a Democratic Socialist of America program.
Look-
it is now the law of the land in this country.
That's
the
not
fact
true.
That Deb Haaland,
Not true.
The fact that Deb Haaland is cancelling energy leases all over this country, directly put in place by a card-carrying open member of the Communist Party USA, which is completely documentable. I have it in my books.
Sure.
I can show
before we
you
get
all
in-
of it.
Before we get into the book, I think what we're actually touching upon here is the simple fact that the Communist Party USA has relinquished its role as an independent political organ of the working class and has entirely subordinated itself as an institution to the Democratic Party. So it makes hold on, let me finish because I let you finish. It makes sense that here or there you're going to find staffers of this or that person who's actually in power, who's a member of the Communist Party. The whole role of that organization is just to serve Democrats. And I know this because it's a huge point of contention within the party. People in the party are not happy about this, but Joe Sims and Rosanna, who are corrupt sellouts from the Committees of Correspondence era, who are reformists from the Gorbachev era, who reject Orthodox Marxism-Leninism, continue to toe this line. Why? Because they're corrupt sellouts who are institutionally subordinated to powers that are higher than them. And again, this has historical precedent. Traitors to the working class movement, ex-communists, make for excellent servants of the ruling class. They did in World War I when the Social Democrats of Germany and France were at the vanguard of promoting the First Imperialist War. And that's exactly what Lenin was standing out opposed to and against. So you're completely wrong. All you're proving is that there's a whole lot of people who were communists at one point became shills, sellouts, and traitors, which is true. I agree. They're traitors to the communist movement.
Look, when Judith LeBlanc is up there putting a Secretary of the Interior in place, when the current Secretary of Labor was put in place by two pro-Chinese communists, who is actually going out there supporting Chinese-supported strikes across the country, when our energy policy is in the toilet, where Biden, who has worked with the communists his entire career, has sold off 50% of America's oil reserves, which we need to fight a war, some of it to China. That is examples of high-level communist infiltration to the advantage of China and other enemies of America. That is what I'm talking about.
So if I understand you correctly, you're trying to say that the communists, who don't own any of the means of production, unlike the oligarchical capitalist class, who don't even hold any position of office and have no actual power of their own, they're the ones in power, not the actual oligarchical elite. Not BlackRock. So the people who own our land and our resources, those are the ones in power. Joe Sims is.
How about we clarify?
Let's
clarify. The point is, you don't need to say I'm a communist to be a communist.
Okay, so, but where's the proof that the people who owned our land, resources, and means of production, which is the fundamental foundation of power, when you use common sense, if you own how we feed ourselves and clothe ourselves and live, you have more power than anyone else. So where's the proof that they are communists?
It is when they control the levers of power. And right now, the energy
power is
industry,
downstream from money.
What do you...
You need money to finance a campaign. Where do you get the money?
Power comes from the barrel of a gun.
Okay, what gun
let
is
me
being
finish.
Used? Who makes the gun?
You have got people. The communist movement in this country controls the labor movement.
I asked you for proof. You have none.
I have a huge amount of proof.
Name one communist who controls one given labor.
You're playing a semantic game again. Look, if his point is...
Democratic Socialists of America, a communist group, took over the AFL-CIO in 1994 under John Sweeney. They kicked out all the old guard. And here's a good example. The AFL-CIO used to be opposed to illegal immigration. Used to be. When the Marxists took over under Eliseo Medina and John Sweeney, they completely reversed the policy to promoting illegal immigration
So as
to
a
the
Marxist-
detriment of American
So
workers.
as a Marxist, does it make sense that illegal immigration has its basis in the ideology of a few self-proclaimed Marxists, or have its basis in the material incentive of the capitalist class to have cheap labor? Which one?
Well, they play on that. They use the Chamber of Commerce.
So which one comes first?
The Marxists.
So you think that the material...
Marxists have used to look.
You think the
get off this
material
material
incentive-
stuff? It is power. It is raw
Okay.
power. You have a Secretary of the Interior who is closing down our energy industry because
Yeah.
she was put in place by an agent of the CCP.
Okay, so-
that is real power. You don't have to own something to control it.
Why
you had
is it that-
you had 50 mafia controlling Vegas for years.
Yeah.
You have a few hundred communists, by controlling the labor unions, can control the policy direction of the entire Democratic Party.
we have no proof
and they're
of that,
doing that.
but we can
I have
deduce-
extensive proof of that. This is what I write my books about. They are all documented.
I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I don't think your books have any proof of it.
Well, each
By
book,
any standard of proof.
each
Well, I
book.
mean,
well, I've been calling out these politicians for their communist ties for over 10
You're
years.
accusing them
Not
of that.
one-
It's like how Antifa accuses
look,
anyone of being a fascist.
I have
based on what?
documentary evidence. You don't come to a foreign country and say that a large proportion of their leaders are traitors, and you do it for 10 years on multiple shows to millions of
They're
people.
not. What are they the
unless
leaders
you
of?
have-
How have they promoted any communist hegemony?
well, Obamacare, open borders.
But hold on. If you're saying Obamacare came from democratic socialism, Bernie's the one who repopularized that term, and he wanted a single payer system, not Obamacare. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Their goal is Medicare for all, full
So
socialized
what?
healthcare.
Scandinavian countries have that. Plenty of countries who are not
Yeah, and New
communist
Zealand
have
has
that.
it too, and it's a total disaster.
So every country that has universal healthcare is because of communism.
That's just-
But
it's
hold
just-
on,
no,
hold on,
but
hold on.
that
Like,
is a socialist construct.
Look, man, I mean, people can decide for themselves, but you saying the goal of the communists should always be to have a dramatic, hard, revolutionary implementation of policy is just not real.
I'm not saying a dramatic, that means like an uprising. I mean, have an independent party, field your own candidates, and build your own independent movement. The
You're
communists.
talking about overt versus
So
subversive.
Yeah, that's only that's a tip of the
hold on.
iceberg.
The
That's
Communist
a tip of the
Manifesto
iceberg.
says the communists disdain to conceal their views.
Yeah,
there has
but
never been-
this is Marxism, Leninism. Lenin was all about conspiracy. Lenin was getting people.
Lenin
it
had
is
to
not the gaining of power that counts. It is the keeping of power
No.
that counts.
Lenin.
That's Lenin.
Lenin had to engage in secrecy because under the Tsar there was no freedom of expression or speech.
But the
So it's
communists
complete-
still
it
engage
wasn't
in
to
secrecy
deceive. It
now.
wasn't to deceive ordinary
communism.
people.
Communism is still under the Civil Rights Act in this country. Communism is still excluded.
Yeah,
So-
but,
so
but
if the
it's not
argument is
enforced. It's not
that-
enforced.
But if the argument is that Lenin was forced to conceal his views because of under the Tsar he was not allowed.
Yeah.
At the time in the United States, when many of these people are coming in and acting subversively, they're doing it for quite
But the
literally
Supreme
same
Court
reason.
has never upheld these laws.
But
against
that's not the
communist
issue. It is not
expression.
socially acceptable.
But they were fought in court, so it's
That's not what
actually-
I'm saying. I'm saying if it is not socially acceptable and people don't like the term, then acting in
Where
an
is that in Leninism? Leninism doesn't say.
You just said-
No. Lenin says if they're going to throw you in the Siberian labor camp under the czars, yeah, don't break the laws. Be secretive.
My point
but he's
is-
not. There's no element of deception of ordinary people.
Yes, if the argument is there are people who are communists at heart and they are implementing single measures moving towards communist policy,
Yeah.
that does not negate the fact that they're communists. You're arguing that a communist would have to come in and say, we're abolishing private healthcare and creating a universal government only healthcare instantly. No. They're going to say, we need to get from A to Z and we got to go through every step in between.
that
to get
kind
there.
of conspiracism is not the communist way.
It
It's
is
always been rejected by
100%
communists.
the communist way. What you see as communism is the tip of the iceberg. Most communist work is undone underground in churches, in labor
to
unions,
simplify this,
in the Democratic Party.
So
that is the real communist
So to
movement.
simplify this and get an appraisal of where we stand, because this is relevant to current events, do you believe Joe Sims of the Communist Party USA influences our politicians more than AIPAC?
Yes, 100%. way
So
more.
you think Joe Sims in the Communist Party USA?
Not Joe, because he's an idiot.
Okay, so
but the movement, the key people around
so you think
him, yes,
you
absolutely.
think these fossilized communists who they want to basically dissolve the party as their goal and retire. You're saying that these leftovers have more power over American politics than AIPAC does?
100%.
I think that's delusional.
Well, how many cabinet ministers, how many cabinet secretaries has AIPAC put in power?
If any single one of them go against AIPAC's line, what happens to them? What happened to Rashida Tlaib for having a Palestine flag?
Well, what she should have happened.
She got censored by Congress. Why did they all vote? Why did they all vote for her to be censored out of their authentic beliefs? No, because
of social,
because they're bribed by AIPAC.
The Jewish vote is big.
But also, I want to say, like, it's not AIPAC. AIPAC is a component of the lobby, but the American military-industrial complex loves the foreign wars. I don't believe that AIPAC is behind why the U.S. is invading all of these different countries around the world and why they're funding Ukraine.
We can. Yeah, I think that
the war machine is the reason.
That's reasonable, but
I think the communist movement is way more powerful.
But there is
than
a
the
kind of
military-industrial
explicit,
complex.
clear. You don't need this vast conspiracy. If you speak out against Israel, AIPAC and the Zionist lobby openly, it's not in secret. They openly go after you and try to destroy your life.
Yes, but this
You're
is true
a politician.
for every lobby, and there's
That's
very
not.
big
That's
lobbies
hold
too.
on. That's not true. If you speak against Turkey or if you even speak against Saudi Arabia, the consequences and the repercussions are far less severe than if you do it against Israel.
And this has more to do with American generalized foreign policy and conquest than just a single country like Israel.
Yeah.
Israel being a strategic location for the U.S. set up safe operations because they want to invade Iran. Securing Iraq and Afghanistan was very, very, very,
so
very
why do we
difficult.
want to invade Iran, to be clear?
Well, there's a long, long history
Yeah.
of the plans the U.S. has, particularly if you look at...
Is it the communists who want to invade Iran?
I don't know what you would call it. Who wants to invade Iran? The American empirical, you know what? I think
Who wants to
the
invade
liberal
Iran?
economic order is probably the better way to phrase it.
Are communists in charge of that order?
The liberal economic order.
Yeah, are communists in charge of that
I
order?
would not know.
Communists
Would you-
are in charge.
let me ask
There's
you-
huge communist influence in the U.S. State Department.
Okay,
There is
then why
huge
do we want to
communist
invade
influence
Iran?
in the department.
Then why do we want
I
to
don't
invade
know.
Iran?
Who wants to invade Iran?
The United States.
It's very clear we want to
Well,
invade Iran.
why
No
If
question.
communists are in power, why do we want to invade Iran? If communists are serving Iran, why don't we make peace with Iran instead of going to war against them?
This is why we have a nuclear deal with Iran. This is why Biden just gave them $7 billion.
Do you think that the reason we have a
It's just been revealed that there's a major Iranian influence operation in Washington that has been talked about in numerous
I'm going to press
newspapers
X to doubt.
that are in the Department of
Pressing
Defense.
X to doubt.
So the argument,
But I do want to say,
so
I
the
do want
argument
to
would
say,
be
yeah.
that communist elements in the U.S. do not want to go to war with Iran,
Right.
And American imperial interest or the liberal economic order interest, international, would want to go to war.
So who's
with
in
Iran.
power?
Currently, and for the longest time, it has been the liberal economic order.
So it's not
powers.
the communists.
No.
Yeah, I would not argue that communists run the entirety of the
I
country.
think it's kind of
They don't run
delusional.
the entire thing, but they're the most influential group in America.
And yet we want to go to war with Iran, and communists don't.
Yeah, but
So it's
influential
kind of,
does not mean in
America-
control.
but he's saying that they control the American political
They
system.
control the policy direction of the Democratic Party.
But the
at every
Democrats,
level.
the only reason we had that nuclear deal with Iran was because we were pursuing a strategy of allying with the reformist factions in Iran, which were more pro-European, more pro-Western, and this is the most important thing, they didn't want to economically couple with China. We did it to prevent Iran from integrating with China, which they have already done,
The
which is
reason-
why Joe Biden is not actually going back to the table with that deal, because it's not possible. Raisi, who's a hardliner, is in power. The reformist Rouhani is no longer in power. So we're not pursuing that strategy
this all
anymore.
is factional. Look, the mullahs are basically, they're all trained in Patrice Lumumba's school in Moscow. Iran is a puppet of Moscow.
You're saying the mullahs who are
reason-
from the Iranian countryside were trained in Moscow?
Absolutely, Patrice Lumumba's school in Moscow.
Was Ayatollah Khomeini trained in Moscow?
No, but several people around
Was
him were.
Ali Khamenei the current supreme
I'm
leader?
not sure. I could check that out.
He
but I
wasn't.
know-
I'll just give you the answer.
Well,
he
I
wasn't.
can know many of the current leaders are. But the reason we have
Which
a
ones?
nuclear deal with Iran, I can provide you a list. I
Okay.
can talk to my friend.
Okay. I'd be interested in that list.
I can provide you a list.
Because Iran did not pursue a pro-Soviet policy.
Iran has always been a puppet of Russia, right from the revolution. The Iranian Communist Party, the Tudeh.
Then why did they
party,
ban the Communist Party in Iran?
Because once they had taken power, Russia wanted an Islamic state.
Why?
Because they didn't want. It was useful to them to have an Islamic state creating mayhem in the Middle East rather than their hand.
Was it all part of the Soviet plan to dissolve itself too, or what was that?
Well,
did
the
that
Soviet
happen?
plan, I think, was a really
Now,
strategic.
if you watch The Simpsons,
Yeah.
you know, there's that joke where he's like, "That's just what we wanted you to think." Hits the button, and then Soviet Union comes back.
Look,
Yeah.
you say yourself, Russia still has communist forms. And
The party, the Communist Party, that's what I'm referring to.
the whole society.
The
is still-
infrastructure is still from
and
the Soviet era.
in
Yeah.
the Donetsk and Luhansk, they are now people's republics. They've got Soviet iconography.
I agree.
They're flying Russian old hammer and sickle flags. So they are allied to China, which is a communist power. They're allied to Cuba.
No, the legacy's there. I agree.
Yeah, it's still there. So,
But
and that's still
how do they
expansion.
regard? But how do they regard people like Gorbachev and the dissolution of the Soviet Union? Do they say that was all part of the plan? Or do they say
it was? It was really a strategic.
But when I
but
talk,
the same people in power, the Soloviki, the intelligence services who are running things under Gorbachev are still there today. They're still.
But the
Putin is
KGB
not-
was kind of opposed to Gorbachev. They tried to get rid of Gorbachev in that hardliner coup in the 1990, I believe.
Yeah, well,
but
Khrushchev,
Putin,
I know that.
But Putin himself says that the dissolution of the Soviet Union was a tragedy and was a mistake.
Absolutely.
So how can you say that it was the plan of the Soviet Union to dissolve itself?
It was a strategic retreat. They were under huge pressure.
What created that retreat specifically?
Well, they were under huge pressure from the West, economically, for one
How?
thing, and internal.
So who's? But I thought the West was controlled by communists. So who's
we're talking
pulling the
under
string?
Reagan here, which was a little bit different.
So Reagan got rid of all the communists in control. To be clear.
No, not all of it, but he had a major impact, just like Trump had a major impact on foreign policy.
So you think?
But when the Democrats are in power, the communist foreign policy pretty much is in
So
play,
would you
as
say
it is
that
today.
Reagan was this independent populist, not beholden to the interests of the oligarchical elites?
I'd say he had more independence than most American presidents, just as Trump had more. I'm not saying totally. He still had George Bush on his, as VP, but was more independent and stronger against communism than any other American
So
president had
you
been.
don't believe that anti-communism was a real policy of the deep state after the Cold War?
It was in some aspects. Like
Why did we launder money to fund fascist, neo-Nazi, anti-communist mercenaries in Africa, death squads in Latin America,
the word
Greek
just used
military
is fascist.
junta?
I don't regard Savimbi as a fascist.
Well, but we did fund anti-communist fascists, to be clear, throughout the developing world.
I think
we helped fund the
quick.
genocide in Indonesia.
I think this
is missing a big picture here. Look, the people who control systems don't care what you call it. The United States is going to fund whatever they want to fund to remain in power, be it communism or otherwise.
I agree. I just don't think
Same is true for the Soviets and China.
I just don't agree that it makes sense that communists, as opposed to the people who actually control the means of life, are in power. I just don't agree with that.
Well, why have we got Obamacare? Why have we got a new?
We have
if you
Obama.
If you want to know what the Democrats are going to do tomorrow, read the Communist Press today, because they were talking about socialized healthcare for years. They got it implemented through Physicians for a National Health Program.
They
got it implemented through
Bernie came out opposing the Obamacare system and wanted to implement
because it
single
wasn't
payer.
strong enough.
But why did it? Here's the question.
It was an interim
I
step.
do agree that Obama was a popular candidate. He was a people's choice. I do think that in 2008. But then what happened? He got into power, and what did he do? Instead of fighting, he compromised, and Obamacare was that compromise.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a step towards socialism. So it's
that
incremental. You take what you can
But that
get.
was a grassroots movement.
Grassroots movement completely orchestrated by Democratic Socialists of America and CPUSA.
But the DSA didn't start gaining traction until after Bernie repopularized the term.
They were heavily involved.
Look
in
at the membership of DSA pre 2016.
It was about
but that doesn't mean...
in the period where they had a lot of influence, about 84 to 90, their membership was about 12,000. Lenin took over the Soviet Russia with 2,000 people.
Right, but I think
the
the issue-
numbers are irrelevant.
But
it is the influence. They took over the labor unions in 1994. That is proven fact. They removed the anti-communist clause from the AFL-CIO's constitution. The old 60s communists came flooding in. Every major labor union in the country now is controlled by Marxists and communists and Leninists, and they dictate the policies of the Democratic Party.
I disagree. I think you're conflating progressives, which is
No,
preceding
I am
the
talking
hold on.
Marxist and Marxist.
Wait, but hold on.
Leninists.
But Democratic politicians since the 40s who were not communists, who were not Marxists, drawing from the legacy of the progressive movement in the U.S., they had nothing to do with Marxism. They had nothing to do with the CPUSA, and they believed in universal health care. Right?
No, that's not true.
So I'm just trying to say, yes, Obama did draw a new platform because of overwhelming dissatisfaction with the hegemonic Democrat and Republican positions. Remember, he was running against Hillary Clinton, a mainstream Democrat, in 2008.
She is not a mainstream
Well,
Democrat.
at the time she was compared to him, right? So yes, there was a lot of new ideas Obama brought to the table, but as we see, all of those ideas went into the dumpster.
All of those ideas come out of the Marxist movement. Open borders
Not true.
was a absolutely
Open
that
borders
came
is
through
rejected.
Alessio Medina, a Marxist who changed the AFL-CIO's policy in 2000 at their conference in Los Angeles from anti-illegal immigration to pro-illegal immigration.
But concretely,
Obamacare was completely 100% a Marxist policy.
But hold on. That doesn't mean that they're the ones who created open borders. The people who created open borders was the capitalist class.
It was the communists who got the Democrats to flip their policy from opposing illegal immigration to supporting it.
Okay, did illegal immigration accelerate or decrease under George W. Bush?
I'm sorry, hold on. The CPUSA is for open borders. I went to their website.
No. Hold on.
Yeah.
To be clear, yes, the CPUSA is everything the Democrats believe in, the CPUSA does. But I reject the view that the open borders policy originates with the CPUSA and the DSA.
Massive. Look, there's two constituencies for illegal immigration. There is the Chamber of Commerce element who wants cheap labor.
Yeah.
There's the left-wing Democrat element who wants a revolutionary base and a massive increase of votes for the Democrats.
So which one do you think is more powerful?
Oh, absolutely, the communists. You know, this is
that makes no sense.
There was always an illegal immigration problem.
Let me ask you a question.
Eisenhower deported 3 million of them. It crept up. Reagan stupidly put an amnesty in.
Was he a communist?
No, but he just did a stupid thing.
Why did he do it?
Probably responding to business pressure.
Well, here's a question for you.
But also the left.
Why is
it has massively accelerated. Nobody can deny that illegal immigration massively accelerated under Obama, then even
and
more
under George W.
That's right.
Way more than
George
of course. W.
And so the issue particularly for me and what I see is I'm not going to sit and argue communists are controlling everything, but certainly their whims are more likely to be met, especially as time progresses. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
We're looking at Enrique Tarrio, who's they call him a fascist, who was not even in D.C. getting 22 years in prison for a thing he wasn't at. Why? Because he posted a tweet. Not a tweet. It was a Getter post or something like that, or a Parler post. Meanwhile, the people who are outside the White House who firebombed it, of leftist persuasion, the people outside of the federal buildings, very little is done to curtail any of that. So there is this thing we've been seeing where I can go to a journalist we have on the show and I say, why do you think it is that the feds are not going so heavily after the people who firebombed the White House on 5/29? And he goes, the what?
Yeah.
He doesn't even know what happened. And then we actually do see this right now in all of our media institutions. Overt Marxist influences is prevalent. So I worked for numerous media organizations, and we hear it all the time. People who are classically liberal, constitutionally Republican, or even people who are like alt-right nationalists hide their views. And people who are overtly communist proudly state it, and they even have sickle and hammer patches.
Unless they're like me or Jackson, and in which case they're censored from everything. So there's a reason for that, okay? Communists who completely toe the line of the liberal hegemony, and I agree, they're good sellouts. They're effective at being sellouts. But yes, as long as you toe the line of liberal hegemony, you can be a neo-Nazi, as in the case of Ukraine. You can call yourself a communist. You can call yourself an anarchist. You can call yourself literally whatever you want, and nothing bad will happen to you. If you're critical of our policy with regard to Ukraine, which, by the way, internationally is the norm for communists, just not in America, I guess, then you're also going to be censored and under attack. There's someone
critical of Israel and a communist.
Listen, there's someone who I don't even agree with, right? His name is Second Thought. He has a YouTube channel, and we're like enemies, right? But even he is now starting to get deplatformed from, I forget which subscription service it is, because of his views on wars and because of his views on history and things like that. And look, if I go to academia as a Stalinist, okay, it's not going to be pretty for me. If I go to academia as a intersectional post-Marxist, transgender theorist, everything will be fine because it's all about submission to the Democratic Party.
No.
Now, what I do agree with is that the Democratic Party has more hegemony than the Republican Party. The Democratic Party controls the institutions, they control the media, they control the culture. The Republicans, they're obviously corrupt and funded by lobbyists and stuff, but what they do is kind of starting to more capture dissent.
Right.
Yeah,
It's
see,
like
the Democratic Party has more hegemony. The unions control them and the communists control them. You and Jackson are a very tiny subset of the communist movement. Very tiny subset.
But that's the
communist
question.
movement of this country is probably, 200,000 or 300,000 strong. If you
disagree.
If you bring all the people, if you bring
Well,
DSA into it, Freedom Road, Party for Socialism,
Freedom Road is
Liberation,
tiny. I don't know.
But let's just make this distinction.
Freedom Road.
Then. What you're referring to is
organised all the
MAGA
George Floyd
communism,
rights all over
and let's
the
refer
country.
to what the higher hierarchical, more influential communist or Marxist. Let's call it something else. Well, woke left.
Well, here's the I mean, I kind of agree with that, but my one problem is it's like the issue of the cause and effect. Because let's ask a simple question. You don't have to agree with metaphysical materialism, but who is funding all this shit? Where does the money come from? Like, for example, me and Jackson, the reason we have a hard time and they have an easy time is because billionaires fund these people, right?
Yep.
And if billionaires fund you, you obviously have to conform to what billionaires want you to say and want you to implement, right?
Yeah.
Me and Jackson don't do that, so we have a harder time. So my question to you is, if this is a communist movement, where does the communist money come from?
It comes through the Democracy Alliance, which is Steve Phillips, which is Tom Steyer. They are funding the left to the tune of billions of dollars.
So you're saying there's secret communist
There are
billionaires.
different kinds of communism.
Absolutely there are. Many.
You look.
All right,
Steve Phillips, for
Is
instance.
George Soros one of them?
George Soros is a supporter and funder of the left.
Is he a communist?
This is what I'll say. George Soros was a little Jewish boy in Hungary during World War II.
Yeah.
His father fostered him out to a Catholic family, I believe, to protect him from the Nazis.
Yeah.
He used to go around confiscating Jewish properties with his foster father. He was effectively working with the capos.
I'm aware.
So after World War II, the Soviet Red Army took over Hungary and they were hanging Nazi collaborators or turning them to work for them. George Soros was allowed to leave Soviet-occupied Hungary, travel through Soviet-occupied Austria, out to the West. How would someone who'd worked with a Nazi collaborator be allowed to do that had they not made a deal with the
There's
authorities?
one missing piece of that puzzle. Why did George Soros use his money to participate in the color revolution, the springtime of peoples of the 80s, which took down the communist states of the Warsaw Pact?
No, what it did was set up civil institutions in those places to preserve socialist thought. We have this illusion with George Soros and his Open Societies Institute that he fought communism in Eastern Europe. He set up institutions which were then colonized by socialists
you can call
to
it-
keep the socialist dream alive.
Sure.
In this country
You can-
and everywhere around the world, he supported the left. Everywhere you go.
So I think there's this kind of gap of terminology because I want to give you my perspective. If I'm a Romanian factory worker, and socialism for me means I have a job, there's infrastructure, there's a source of living for me, I can have some kind of family, the baseline of my needs are met, and that's the socialist system. And then suddenly all of that is overthrown, and there's a neoliberal hellscape where my daughters are being trafficked into sex trafficking. Everything becomes privatized. I can't afford anything. I can't get by with any job. I have to move and migrate out. I mean, you can say, oh, that's socialist thought. That's also socialism. Well, like in content, materially speaking, why would you call that the same thing? It's completely different.
But
I'm not calling
we've
it the same
already.
thing.
I think we've already made this point. It's that there are people who feel there's a means that the ends justify the means, and therefore there are people who are communists who want this ideal version of communism to be implemented that are utilizing the destruction of society and the working class to create pressure, which pushes them into a left or right position.
See, this is what I
but
say.
that's not what's happening.
But real
I think
communism
it
is
is.
not about sharing the wealth or building a great society. Real communism is centralizing all wealth and all power in a very few hands.
But
all this
hold on,
Marxism
hold on,
stuff
hold on.
is
But-
just fluff.
But yes,
hold
but
on.
hold on. My point
Yeah.
is, And that may be what we see practically, but even for you, with a more idealistic version of a working system between
I don't
people,
think it's idealistic. I think on the
I'm saying an ideal version of communism in your mind.
It's not ideal. It's the real experience.
Okay, so there's someone who says, in order to get from here to the real experience, we have to break down the capitalist structures to create this. There's only one way you do it. You have to step by step erode and destroy people's lives in the process.
So Mao and North Korea did not need to fund LGBT to have communism in Korea or
not
China.
in those.
Every system's different.
Those they did
but they
that for
did need a
military
culture
force.
revolution and a disruptive.
But the Cultural Revolution was not like overthrowing basic like sexual norms and
No,
basic
it was whatever's needed to
No,
destroy
of
the
course
social
not.
system.
Because they
the
were in power. They just wanted to use the youth to eradicate former bourgeois concepts to create a new man.
No.
Just like Pol Pot did in Cambodia, where they killed a third of the
Red Guards
population.
targeted Communist Party bosses and leaders more than anyone else.
Those who weren't sufficiently enthusiastic, they did.
No,
yes.
it was because, this is the actual reason, China imported initially its system from the Soviets, which was foreign imported, and therefore you had a bureaucracy within China not in touch with the masses. So the Cultural Revolution was launched in order to actually make socialism in China Chinese in content and actually humble these bosses and bureaucrats and submit them to a popular will.
No, submit them to the absolute rule of those in power.
Which was
this is always, communists always put this idealistic spin on tyranny. Well, we did it in the name of the people. We had to destroy these bourgeois elements. We had to destroy those who weren't sufficiently revolutionary. It is all about naked power. Revolution is about
whose power? I agree, power,
the
but whose
leadership
power?
of the Communist Party.
But what did that amount to?
hold on.
But as Dong Ping Han writes in his book, that power concretely amounted to increased autonomy and self-governance of the Chinese peasant.
Absolute garbage.
Okay, I implore you to read the book.
It resulted in their complete control over all aspects of life by the CCP.
The historical facts disagree.
Okay, now, gentlemen.
Well, no, they don't.
We unfortunately have gone a half hour over because I think we did have a great conversation.
Yeah.
So half an hour over, I think we're unfortunately going to have to wind things down.
Just
No problem.
say where
But
people can go.
absolutely.
Because I'm here for a reason too. One of the other reasons. Look, go if you want to know the real Marxist infiltration of the government, go to trevorloudon.com. Security risk senators. 30 senators exposed, House Un-Americans. I talk about 100 US Congress members working for the communist movement or radical movements. And you got to see Enemies Within the Church, which is all about the Marxist origins of the woke church. You've got to see Enemies Within the Church, the Marxist origins of the woke church, all available, signed copies, trevorloudon.com.
How's, do you want to shout anything out?
I think I'll just say, infrared.gg, it's where we've centralized in proper communist fashion all of our media. We have Substacks, writings, we have our YouTube, we have our live streaming, which is kick.com/infrared, where I live stream. Also, my Twitter, @infrahaz, is also where I share a lot of my writings and stuff. And be on the lookout for an upcoming book that's going to be coming out within the next few months. And just infrared.gg, I guess.
All right. Well, I certainly don't think we can hash out the entirety of the circumstances in a couple hours, but gentlemen, thank you for coming. I think this was an absolute blast. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
For everybody
Thank you.
who's
Thank you,
watching,
House.
absolutely.
Thank you, Tim.
Make sure you subscribe to Tenet. Subscribe to this channel. New channel, awesome stuff coming up. If you check out the videos, you can see Lauren Southern, you can see Matt Christensen, you can see Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin. It's going to be a blast. Really excited to bring this show to Tenet. We've got more coming next week. Next week will be absolutely incredible. I hope to see you there. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see y'all next time.